Oh, welcome back to the Radio Gamescast. As always, I'm your host Ryan, and today I'm joined just by my lovely co-host Brett.
That's me. I'm here, and they can only mean one thing.
Can only mean one thing: we played a game that everyone else doesn't like,
Yeah, yeah,
or is not
for
interested in
various
playing.
reasons.
Which is
Uh,
Armored Core 6. We got a lot of Armored Core to talk about here, Brett, and I think we're gonna have a good
mhm.
time discussing many a thing about Armored Core.
Yes.
Long awaited return here. So as always with the Games Club episodes, we're starting out with a spoiler-free review, and then I will very clearly say when we're going to go into spoilers. So if you just want to hear
hmm
our opinions on the game and gameplay discussion and whatnot, like should you play it, we're gonna do that first, and then hop into a full breakdown of the endings. And we didn't just play one ending, Brett. We played all
At all of
three.
them.
So we're going
Yeah.
into everything, all the New Game Plus stuff after that. Breakdown from non-spoiler to spoiler, which will again be very clearly stated. So let's hop in to our first playthrough, Brett. Let's talk about gameplay and what we think
Yes.
overall of the game. Because I think this is the most contentious thing, because right up until release, I think you and I were both hearing the dreaded, this is Armored Core is just Dark Souls but mechs, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And it was like, it is this just going to be Dark Souls with robots, and then equally loud and eventually as annoying? No, this is nothing like Dark Souls, and like both sides just grasping at straws for the most just strange explanations and reasons why, if it goes too far in either direction, the balance of the universe will be offset in such a way that everybody will die horribly, and it'll be a terrible disaster. It turns out, uh, at least I think so. I think they'd hit like a perfect middle ground for the most part.
Yep.
Um, I think it still feels to me having. So I guess it is worth saying, because neither of us are like crazy Armored Core veterans from like 1997 or something.
Yes, though we did
I
both go back and play. I think you played a number more than I did.
Yeah,
But I at
because I
least
think
went
like
back and
last
played a
year I
bunch of
started
Armored
going
Core
back.
2 in
hmm
preparation for this.
Yeah, but we've familiarized ourselves to varying degrees with the clunky tank controls and how much like physics bunny hopping based the older ones on the PS2 were. I played through all those. My favorite being Last Raven, which is considered by many to be really hard and annoying, and it is, but sometimes it's worth it. So what I'm trying to say here is that again we have the stomach, we have the gumption to handle the Armored Core game. As if we need to clarify that. I know some people think that we do.
Yeah, I also want to clarify.
um,
Brett and I are the Souls people on the podcast. Like we
yeah, pretty
are the ones
much.
that play the hyper difficult Souls games, even if, though I don't think either one of us would call Souls hyper difficult generally. Uh,
No.
but we're the people that align with those games. So I think we've got a perspective here that is a little bit more informed, at least in the FromSoft end, than the rest of the podcast, which is
Yeah.
why it's just the two of us. All right.
But yeah, they've nailed. It feels like you're piloting something. It doesn't just feel like you're a guy running around, which
That's what I
is like
really
it's
like
something.
about this in
Yeah.
comparison to and I should clarify, I have played a number of the other Armored Core games. The only one I've played a significant amount of is 2. This feels to me way better than 4 Answer and 5
Mhm.
or Verdict Day, whatever the fifth one is actually called.
Both of
Yeah,
those.
where you've got those two, I think for me leaned on too fast and just became basically Ace Combat at the speeds
Yeah,
they were
four and
moving
for
at,
answer, they're speedy ones.
which is fun, but I think I vastly prefer this sort of middle ground between old school Armored Core and new school Armored Core that
Yeah.
AC6 landed in, which is everything still feels like has weight, but you're moving very fast,
hmm
which to me feels really good most of the time.
Yeah. This we'll talk about when exactly this happens, but for first playthrough especially, because this game I don't think it really controls like much else, even other like FromSoft things. It's just it's a different beast, and so it makes sense that it just
Yeah, I
wouldn't
mean the
control
most
like
similar
Elden
thing
Ring.
you'd find, because it doesn't control like other Armored Cores.
No, it
It
doesn't.
does
Yeah.
kind of control like Demon X Machina, but
A little, yeah.
it plays significantly differently than Demon X Machina does. So yeah, I think if you're going in expecting it to be the same as that game, you're going to be in for a surprise, because it's definitely a different sort of design than Demon X Machina as well.
Yes, and I at least in my opinion, I think it succeeded where Daemon X Machina didn't necessarily fail, but didn't have anything else in the market to fail against, so it was
Yeah.
just kind of the only option for a couple of years. uh, it's for just like super brief comparison, Daemon X Machina as a mech game is very like it does just feel like you're playing a character. Whereas Armored Core 6 feels like you can like skate and drift around and you have inertia for every movement and everything. And just the
Yeah,
way like
Demon X Machina doesn't tend to put up much of a fight either. Like
yeah.
it's more along the lines of a Project Wingman difficulty level, and not a Armored
Yeah.
Core difficulty level.
But yeah, you're in your AC. You play as 621. Otherwise, whatever silly name you gave yourself in the character creation dialogue box. And you do little missions for your friends and sometimes for your enemies, and you make new friends and enemies depending on what missions you choose, and sometimes what choices you make during those missions. You for the most part, I think it's worth pointing out. It is a mission-based game, but for like 75% of it, you can pick which missions you want to do in like whatever order out of like chunks of like 3 or 4 or 5, depending on where you are in the story, before it starts to like kind of funnel you into what ending you're getting.
Yeah.
Um, but and I'm glad to see that this isn't like a fully open world thing, because it's just not what Armored Core is.
Yeah, that was one of
They've
the weirder
already
pre-launch debacles, is after Elden
yeah
Ring, everyone going like, "Hey, is Armored Core 6 going to be open world?" And I think, having played it now, I think most people have realized why it isn't. It just is not a
hmm
it's not a formula that works in an open world game. It maybe the
no, yeah.
gameplay would work fine, but the structure of the game would have to be drastically different. And
It would
I
have to
think
be called
it's
something
very
else.
well served the way it is.
Yeah.
All right.
Um,
For other gameplay stuff that I really enjoyed that I want to take note of before we're in the spoiler section, I think the way this controls is really good if you have a controller with paddles. Uh,
yes, that's worth pointing out.
this is
Worth pointing
another.
out.
So this is the game that made me buy an Elite controller. I had to get the paddles because
The 8-bit
aiming
has
and
paddles
moving
in the button.
is extremely important in this game at the same time. You could get around that by just playing with the hard lock all the time, but if you want to use the soft lock at all, you're gonna be doing either a wacky claw grip or using the paddles,
Yeah.
because this is, you press as many buttons as you do in older Armored Core games, and this time they're in maybe even more inconvenient places. So
Yeah. Somehow.
you're gonna be doing a lot of button pressing that maybe makes your fingers hurt a little bit,
hmm
as well as often needing to have your fingers both on the triggers and the bumpers at the same time.
Yes.
Which, if you've never done that in the game, is kind of an awkward grip to get used to. So just a thing to note of, like, I would recommend, if you're looking to pick this up, either check if you're comfortable doing that like double trigger or trigger and bumper grip, or look into getting a controller with paddles. They're great
Yeah.
for other games
I've
too, but this in particular felt like it was a huge change when I
yeah,
actually got
yeah.
it.
I feel like I've heard that mouse and keyboard does pretty good for this game also,
Yeah,
but I
I've tried
haven't
it.
tried it myself.
It works as you'd expect. I think it's a lot more akin to a regular third-person shooter when you're playing on mouse and
Yeah.
keyboard.
Probably
But
better than like Elden Ring or Dark
yeah,
Souls, God forbid.
a lot more sensical on mouse and keyboard. As long as you aren't one of the people that like right clicks or left clicks all the time, and then you'll just be melee attacking constantly. But
hmm
there's ways around that. Yeah, it plays well on either. I think a lot of PvP people are preferring mouse and keyboard, because you can use manual aim with mouse and keyboard much better
Yeah,
than you can
yeah.
with controller. I think for very obvious reasons of, like, this is not a game where manual aim is going to give you auto aim. So
No,
mouse and
yeah.
keyboard is just
It's
like
actually the opposite.
clearly much better. Um, and yeah, it's got multiplayer. I don't know that we've mentioned that already. There is room-based matchmaking multiplayer where you get into a room and do some fights against people.
Yeah, we'll talk about that more later, not because it's spoilers, but just because there's a lot, I think, to talk
Yeah,
about with
it's
that.
as far as
It's
a review
there.
goes, it's there. If you're really into build crafting, you might like the multiplayer, but at the
Yeah.
same time, there's definitely been some metas that are a little bit wacky. And
Uh-huh.
your experience is going to vary pretty heavily because there's not like a quick match or something. You do have to join rooms like you would in a lot of older fighting games for
Hmm.
multiplayer, which, depending on what era of games you started playing multiplayer stuff in, I think you might have a different reaction to that.
Yeah.
Um, hey, Brett, where's the story?
Yeah.
Does this game have no story?
Well, you know what? We usually do a pretty good job, I would think, of not being mean to people on this podcast, but I'm just gonna come out and say, you can do your whole these words come from not the company you work for, Ryan, but I think if you played this game and think that it doesn't have a story, you should go back to elementary school and learn how to read, because you clearly don't know how. And this game has a fantastic story. And if you actually, you don't have to think that it's a fantastic story because we can all have our opinions. But there's a story, and it's like there are words and characters and cutscenes and events that you go through that can change depending on your actions. And I I don't know. There's a full story here that's very robust and like well crafted and told to you in a very interesting way. And they're just not a small group of people. There's like a large amount of both like actual games journalists and the the YouTubers that make their own separate reviews separate from like an IGN or something that like there's it's just like a coin flip on whether or not people playing this game think that this game has a story, and that's just crazy to me
It's
because I
really really baffling.
it's yeah because it's not like, oh, I wish there was more from the story, like, okay, I can understand that, but it's just like straight up, I wish this game had a story, and it's like, well, what are you
You either
talking
skipped
about?
every briefing in the game or
Yeah.
don't know. I think that legitimately might be what happens. I think a lot of reviewers, especially reviewers that aren't from a media company, can
Hmm.
fall into is trying to get through a game as fast as possible to then play the next game to review, which makes sense if you're a reviewer. Like if that's your job and you need to get to the next biggest game, makes sense. But uh, it's really, I think, misleading in an actual review to
Yeah.
then go, this game doesn't have a story. And yeah, we don't name and shame here, but it is a
No,
thing
yeah, I'm
that
not
was
gonna
like
pick out
happening a ton
specifically.
with this game in
Yeah.
particular. And I think it is fair to say that the story doesn't really kick off and like accelerate itself into until chapter 3, which is
Yeah, for the most
about
part.
halfway through the game. It's like the longest chapter of the game as well. But as soon as you get into the midway of chapter 3, I was hooked. Like I was
Oh,
super interested in
absolutely.
what was going on. Um, and yeah, I think a lot of it is just like, I think what happened is maybe the marketing in the story trailer led people to think that there would be a more like cutscene heavy story here, but there isn't. Like,
It's yeah, and that's the thing is like that's not that's not Armored Core. You're not gonna get like characters like walking up to each other and doing their secret handshake and talking. It's like, no, there's not a single
but it's also,
human
nobody
being
said this about Ace
shown.
Combat or Project Wingman, the other two
Exactly.
games we're talking about. We keep bringing these two games up because like they're
They're
not
very
mech
related.
games, but they're really good, and they are, I think, in the same kind of genre as this, of like the
Hmm.
sort of Asian anime styled pilot doing pilot things. And
Yeah.
the stories tend to follow a certain type of archetype that shows up a lot in either Gundam or other like sports anime. Even ridiculously, I think is
Yeah.
often especially for Ace Combat, a sort of touch point.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think like it's really weird that people came in expecting that, and I think a lot of it might also fall to FromSoft has a reputation for being obtuse with storytelling. Armored Core
Yeah.
6 is not really obtuse. There is more stuff to find out hidden in like logs and notes you can find in recs and whatnot around the missions, but for the most part the story is directly told to you. Like it is just spit to you in the
Yeah.
face. So I don't know
And it's
how
like,
this many people missed it.
really, because you'd think like the situation you think of in your head is Elden Ring is the game that comes out and gets everybody and their mom to play it or try it, no matter what relation they've had to FromSoft before in their life. And so you get a bunch of new people that don't understand the formula or whatever, and then the next game that come out is like whatever FromSoft you're used to, super obtuse, like crazy difficult, and all these new people are like, oh well, this isn't like Elden Ring at all. This is, but no, they actually just gave you a far more easily understandable story aside from like two things that maybe happen at the very end of one of the endings, and people are just like, oh well, this game doesn't have a narrative, so who are you fighting?
Yeah.
Who are
And
you? Like,
for
come
me,
on.
the test is often soundtrack. And this is a bizarre
Oh yeah.
pivot, but I do want to mention the soundtrack because it's really good.
Oh yeah.
It's not super vocal heavy or anything, but it is some really solid music that I think is excellent.
Hmm.
Towards the end of the game, this is I'm not going to actually say what happens because that would be a spoiler. We'll talk about it later. But
Yeah.
there's moments where they play theme music for characters. And when I know a game's story has worked is when the theme music hits and I feel it in my
Yeah.
bones. And that
Yeah.
happened every single mission in the second half of this game. So
Hmm.
I think for a lot of people, it's just like maybe they weren't reading arenas or they weren't reading briefings, which is, if you just want to play for the action, that's totally fine because this is also an extremely competent
Yeah.
action game. So it's totally
Absolutely.
valid to play this game if you don't care about the story and just want to play the action stuff because it's got like 60, 70 missions worth of really, really solid gameplay. And it's a good time investment even then. But for if you're coming expecting Naughty Dog, it's not going to be there. But there is certainly
Yeah.
a like Mission Impossible, or not Mission Impossible, Top Gun
Top
tier
Gun.
of
Yeah.
storytelling here. I would say.
Getting your Tom Cruises confused.
Getting my Tom Cruise movies confused. Yeah, so that's the story tangent. I think we'll save any other story related stuff for the actual spoiler
Yeah.
discussion. Um,
I if I don't know how many more things we have left before spoilers, but I do want to say
as many as we want,
just to
Brett.
make sure. Well, listen, if you're going into this game, you haven't played it yet for whatever reason, because I feel like I mean, also just the way that people have gotten into this game, if they weren't expecting it to be their thing, is also funny because I saw that one clip that's been going around of the guy on Twitter, and he's like, it makes me feel like a Gundam pilot how smoothly you can take out the ships, and it's just like 10 seconds of him flying up, blasting every turret on one of the PCA cruisers, and then pile bunkering the bridge, and it all just explodes, and that's like you could just do that. Like the amount of people that have just been like, "Oh my, what is this game? I want to play it now," and then they get it and they start posting about it. I've seen has been very funny. Um, but if you are not one of those people and you're just deciding to pick up the game now because somehow we've piqued your interest or we've been the thing that's put you over the fence, uh, there's some things that I think you should avoid, the straight up avoid using on a first playthrough in order to have what I think we could probably both surmise is the intended
Yeah,
experience.
it's rare that we have to bring up balance in this
Yes.
portion of one of these discussions. But Armored Core 6 is a game that, like Souls games and like Elden Ring, I think this is something that FromSoft has taken across games. Uh,
Hmm.
the balance at launch is a little wacky. It's a little bit
It's
past launch now.
it's ass.
It's
I'm
not
gonna say
great.
it's ass. It's all over the place. So there, without any like specifics, because this is not a 3 hour long balance video that they've been made. I've watched some of them, and they break down things very well. But there's so if we're going through our imaginary tier list, right, and it
Yeah,
goes from S to F or whatever. S is like best weapons in the game. You cannot fail with them. And everything down is like lesser degrees of that until you get to F, where they're just like useless sucks. The things that are in F, there's not that many. The things that are in like A and B is like 90% of the weapons in the game. There are like three things that are in S that completely trivialize everything below them. And if you just stick to using only the things in S, you're you're not going to have fun. There is a chance that you will just not have fun because I would think that the people that have gone out and have vocally said that this game is too easy, which I don't know if I'd call this game an easy game. The way I played,
would
at
say
least.
if anyone has told you this game is too easy, reconsider that argument.
They're basically okay.
You can make the game too easy. You can force the game to be easy. You can also force the game to be really hard. So it's important to know that.
Yeah, there's a shotgun that you can use called the Zimmerman that one of my friends that I told to watch this has put in chat hashtag Nerf Zimmermans because we've been like 2 or 3 patches in and it still hasn't happened. I think it's like a out of a scale of like 1,000 is the maximum of the little bar on the weapon stat screen. The Zimmermans are the only weapons that fill your stun 800 out of 1,000 from one shot of the Zimmermans, and you could dual wield them. So most non-AC.
Let's jump a little bit into that, Brett, because I want to talk about stagger and accumulated stagger, and I think this is the place to do it because we're talking about the Zimmermans. So this is nitty grittier. I'm gonna leave off here and say this is the We're leading into the spoiler discussion soon.
Yeah. I just don't use the Zimmermans on the first playthrough. Don't use the Gatlings on the first playthrough. You can use any other weapon, and you will have a fine time. Just do not use those as a crutch. Okay. Continue.
If you're using just one of them, it's probably fine. Like I found just one of them is a lot better. If you use 2 for both of those weapons, that's where things get busted.
Cakewalk.
Yeah. Let's jump into accumulated stagger and stagger before we get into spoilers, because this is where my game design brain goes. This is a problem. And this is I think the biggest issue with gameplay in this game. And to be clear, I had a phenomenal time playing this game. Really good. But I would change things. Like this is, I think, what's keeping this game from being a 10 out of 10 for me. It's sitting in between an 8 and a 9 now because of stagger and accumulated stagger. So they decided to do a stagger system for Armored Core 6 and have the combat rely around stagger. The issue with that is that now the rest of combat was built around this idea of windows of opportunity for damage. And because this is functionally a shooter game, you have the same like weapon classes you would have in most shooters. First of all, range doesn't matter because if a thing's staggered, you're probably in the face of it. So we can take the range thing of like an assault rifle is better at longer ranges. It doesn't matter. An assault rifle is not better at longer ranges because you'll miss. That's the other problem. They all ricochet and you don't do any damage. So functionally, you always want the weapon that can do the most amount of damage in the least amount of time, and range doesn't matter. Which means shotguns are perfect. Like it's the simplest thing of it. It loops back around to shotguns are perfect. And it sucks to nerf shotguns because of that, because I think they feel really good right now. But the problem is other weapons just can't compete with them on the footing that they've placed. And it's not that the other weapons are bad, it's that the shotguns are too good. I think that's an important clarification there. FromSoft did do like a big round of buffs that I think fixed this for a lot of weapons, particularly the assault rifles and not laser weapons, the assault rifles and assault like SMGs that you can use
the non-Gatling
way
machine
better
guns.
Now. Way more useful. But the issue comes back to like you always want to be doing stagger damage because otherwise you won't be able to hit any of your bigger stuff. Because people were complaining early on about like, oh, the songbirds are busted. The songbirds aren't busted. They just work really well at the start because enemies aren't fast enough to dodge them. When you get to the end of the game and around there, they're going to become useless unless you pair them with dual Zimmermans or something that is doing the stagger that you need to get that window of opportunity. But because they're just so much more effective than everything else, it just means the meta is very weird right now. It's locked down into this unfortunate state. I think it's building around stagger as a stat here has kind of led to this weird balance. And I don't know what the fix for that is patch-wise. Because I don't think you can just gut that system, but you have to... I think FromSoft has some heavy lifting to do for that, if they're releasing a DLC or something down the line.
Yeah, because like there are very, very few certain weapons that operate without doing stagger damage, or that just like operate outside the stagger bar. You have flamethrowers that are very fun, and they
Yeah.
actually don't do any stagger at all. I don't think they just do straight flat damage, and they raise your AC's heat level. And then there are the stun weapons that when you get hit by them, your little bar fills up of electricity malfunction, whatever the hell it's called. And then that's the bleed equivalent from other like fantasy from soft games, where every time that bleeds or every time that builds up, you get a proc that's just like 20% of your health is gone or whatever. And both like if you build specifically around those, they could be pretty good in their specific ranges. They will not outpace dual Zimmermans or dual Gatlings though, because they just have both high damage and high stagger, and they don't have to be expressly
And
built
they do
around.
it
You can
all
just
at
have
once as well. That's the other thing.
yeah, in
Like,
one shot for the Zimmermans, or just like one unavoidable spray of 90,000 bullets from the Gatlings, and it's just like for campaign missions, it just makes it a cakewalk for the most part. And for PvP, oh my god, everybody hates you. Like holy crap. The way it will to get into it a little bit, the way PvP works is you have to like every room, like we said, it's like a fighting game. Every room is like set up by someone who has created a room, like a player, and then you like join the rooms if they have a space for someone to join without a password. Um, the first of all, it's just like whoever fights each other is like it'll just pick two random people at the beginning, or whoever won the last match versus the next guy in the tally or whatever. And the host does not have the ability to boot anybody. If somebody is just sitting here at the top with dual Zimmermans winning over and over again, and nobody else can beat them because nobody else wants to stoop to that level, then what happens is the host leaves and the room gets disbanded and everybody has to find a new room. And if that guy joins again, the room's gonna get disbanded again. And it's just this cycle of just people being meta slaves and using only like the best stuff, while the other half of the guys are just trying to do what the game is like really good at otherwise, and is trying to push you to do, which is experiment with other parts and weapons and just make whatever weird thing you want. It doesn't mesh very well, because the people that are actually trying to have fun are just going to get 9 times out of 10 stomped by the meta slaves that are just using what's really good and nothing
mhm.
else. And you don't even get anything for winning. It just says unit alpha or beta wins on the screen. Like there's no point to just sit at the top for the whole time, other than I guess that you just get to play again instead of having to wait like 45 minutes for your turn to come again after you lose if the lobby is full of 9 other people. But it's one of the things that makes one of the big nitpicks of this game is the really bafflingly not that great balance that just kind of ruins certain parts of it. And unless you are lucky enough to run into a group of people that are all ignoring it, or just are playing the single player and are smart enough to ignore it yourself.
Yeah.
I don't know how it got to this point, to be honest. It's really
I think a lot
upsetting.
of it is just it wasn't necessarily balanced with every situation in mind. I think
It's got to
especially a
be,
lot of the
yeah.
game was probably balanced against AC to AC combat with
Hmm.
specific weapons. Like I don't think they expected you to also like go straight to Zimmerman's as the solution
Hmm.
for AC to AC stuff. But the issue that happens with them is Zimmerman's are also relatively lightweight as weapons, which means you
Yeah,
can
and you
put
get
them
them
on
pretty early
a
in the game
fast
too.
AC.
Yeah.
Yeah, and speed comes in of like the way to get around a shotgun is to be fast enough to not get hit by it or be far enough away. But doing that involves taking weapons that are dramatically less effective than the shotgun.
Yes.
And there are ways to get around it, but then it just is basically you run around in a circle at whatever range is the maximum that you can hit the enemy at without the Zimmerman's hitting you, and it doesn't solve the problem. It just creates a cycle of
Yeah.
bad gameplay.
I that there's yeah. It's hard to say what like the thing they should do to get around it is, but like sniper rifles used to be a thing. They're not in the game. There's nothing that has a range
I
that's
think
like
oft what the problem right now is just that there isn't a counter to it that's
it's yeah,
reliable.
unless you play really specifically and are very good.
Yeah, if
Like
you go into like
you
the
got
whole
to be a
boost thing,
maniac.
you can get around it, but that's not I think what most people would jump to for a shotgun
No.
counter would be, I'm going to take a weapon that's longer range, and generally weapons that are long range don't reliably track enemies, and so you're just
No.
going to miss most of your shots unless you get in close range anyway, where they don't have time to react to your projectiles, which is the other, I think, balance problem here of the projectile tracking especially, and in some fights in the game, in like single player, this comes in as well. It feels like oftentimes your projectile tracking is just so poor compared to what you're fighting, especially with longer
Yeah.
range stuff, like assault rifles and whatnot. It it got better with the update, but it's not fully fixed.
Yeah, I have some boss specific
Yeah,
comments on
I
that
think
that
we were on
we'll
the same
get
wavelength
to.
with the bosses that it's a
Yeah.
problem with. On that note, let's go to our recommendation. I think we both are pretty solidly recommending this game.
Yeah.
Despite the long tangent on balance, I think it's an extremely well-made action mech game. Probably the best mech game to have come out in recent
I'd
memory.
say ever.
I
Yeah.
think I would say ever, but I don't want to slander Custom Robo like that or Gundam Breaker 3. So
This is true. This is the most painful 9 out of 10 I've ever had to give anything because it's like so close. And for me it'll probably be my personal game of the year because just nothing really comes close to exactly what I want from a thing. But it's also like
it's so close to being
it's so
almost
close,
perfect. It's
and the
just
way they screwed up are like, guys, you did this right on the PS2. What did you? Has it been too long? Did you forget what the solution was here? But it's
that, and that's the thing with
yeah,
Armored Core 6 that I think is the reason this game scored like 8s out of 10 and not 9 and 10s like Elden Ring.
yeah.
There's a rough edge here that isn't in what most of FromSoft makes. And I think most people are going to be
Mhm.
totally okay with that, but it's noticeable. It is like you notice playing through it that there is an edge here that could have been smoothed out that wasn't. All right. Any last notes that are for non spoilers before we jump into our full spoiler discussion?
Um, I don't know. They've been keeping up with patches every like I think it's 11 days or something. They've been updating the game, and they said they're due for a PvP specific one soon. So I mean, if any, it could be that some of the things we're complaining about are going to be fixed within
The week or so
the
that this
next
comes
few
out.
weeks. Yeah, which is worth saying. But yeah, I think it's time to get into the nitty gritty.
Yeah. All right, let's hop in. And Brett, I think it's important that we start out by talking about the heavy helicopter that you first fight,
Yes,
because I
the
want to
filter
mention this
copter.
one. Now, this is the start of full spoiler discussion, but we're gonna go in a loose order of playthrough. So
Yeah.
we're not gonna like hard spoil the final playthrough until we're talking about New Game Plus 2. Like we're gonna
Hmm.
go in New Game Pluses, but nothing is safe within like the playthrough we're talking about. So first, we're talking about Fires of Raven. This is the one that we both did first. Everything is
Yeah,
free
without
reign
even
here.
communicating it.
Yeah, I think large of it, the large part here is we're gonna go boss by boss. I think for a lot of it because we have some problems, Brett, and some bosses that were really
Just a
good, but
few.
a lot of problems.
Did you have problems with the filter copter, Ryan?
So the filter copter is interesting for me
Not to
because
say that you got filtered because you finished the game, obviously.
oh, I finished the game
Okay,
3 times.
here's here's another thing. Before we can even touch on the game again, okay, the discussion around this stupid community about the difficulty in these games is never going to end, but I'm tired of it and I'm just going to get more angry every time it happens. They should not stoop to making the games easier because the game's not made for people that want easy games. They should not be making bullshit crazier bosses that get harder every single game because it's just going to get to the point where nobody wants to play those. If you had trouble with any of the things in the game, you're a good little earthly creature, and I don't hate you. I don't want you to die. I don't have any horrible feelings against you. Whether you got filtered or not, if you finish the game after, or even continue to play it after doing something hard, you didn't even get filtered, so you're fine. But oh my god, there are people out there that are like, listen, I'm all for making fun of games journalists that are not good at the games that they play. I think it's funny and it'll never end. But there's no reason to eat people up and make them feel bad because they couldn't beat a boss in a video game because it's a video game. And for the people that are very obviously like, it's just like playground humor, like, haha, I got filtered by the boss or whatever, like, oh, I beat it on my first try. Like, there's that's where the get good originated, is people really not actually meaning these things to insult each other at all. The people that take that as actual insults and decide to feel horrible about it and to like make it seem like, oh well, the whole Armored Core FromSoft community is full of mean assholes who just want to gatekeep and make it's like, you didn't get the joke. You got filtered from the community because you were too much of a stick in the mud to even get the joke that nobody is going to actually dislike you for not getting through something. All the fan T-shirts that people made for I beat the boss before it got nerfed in the patch or whatever, that was a joke. That's not real. Nobody actually, if you actually feel like you are superior for doing that in some sort of strange subhuman way, then that's a you problem. But I would like to think that 90% of people do not think that way, and the fact that these discussions keep reaching me in the form of even people that I enjoy talking to just got annoyed by it to the point where I'm just like,
That's the thing.
I don't want to talk to
you
anymore.
Around. I'm gonna go into games journalist mode for a second and use some big words. The discourse around Armored Core 6 is infuriating. It's been horrible. Infuriating the whole time, especially the whole get filtered thing. Because I think a lot of the get filtered stuff comes from people that say that just as an insult and aren't helpful because they're.
Yeah.
In AC6 especially, I think there are a number of boss fights early on, notably the heavy helicopter and Balteus, who are not necessarily super mechanically difficult bosses, but are strategy difficult bosses. It's
they're
really hard
checks
to know on a first fight. I wouldn't say they're skill checks. I think they're straight up strategy checks. Like, did you come in with a plan? And are you executing it?
Yeah.
But they're so early on that players that aren't in the mindset of I need to do this like problem solving with a build aren't going to be ready for that. And I think that's where the problem comes from. Is this is I think the brick wall that FromSoft has put in front of people, and people that knew that this is what it was going to be like are generally totally fine. Are like, oh, we'll get past it a couple of tries. It's the FromSoft loop. Especially because this game's a lot nicer about checkpoints and generally puts one in front of a boss always, which is very good. It lets you really like quickly retry and it's not taking a 10-minute run back every time you fail a fight.
Yes, thank God.
It's instant, and fights are a couple minutes long at the most. So I think there's this weird just culture of like people that are meaning well with and trying to give legitimate advice, but then there's also people that are just get filtered or get good and don't offer any help or make people feel bad for quote unquote getting filtered when they're reaching out and asking for help. I think especially in like the first 2 days of the game's release, there was a lot of stuff around that
for sure,
where people were just like making fun of people for not being able to beat the helicopter. And Brett, I bring this up at the helicopter because the helicopter took me 2 tries. All right, first try absolutely demolished. I didn't understand what was going on because I couldn't hit the helicopter. I was like, what's happening? Because I was trying to use my gun. I tried to use my gun, which was a bad idea. And this is, I think, the problem. What does
Walter say? What does Walter say to you?
I have no idea.
Get up and hit it with your sword.
Get up and hit it with your sword. Okay, so this is the second thing. I remember now. I fought this boss 3 times because the second fight was infuriating. This is the most infuriating. This is my biggest problem with the boss fights, and this continues for the rest of the game. I'm going to see if you agree with me or not when I tell you what it is. But First one, I died because I stayed at range. And so I learned my lesson and was like, okay, I'm going to get up close. And then I got it to a sliver of health. I didn't take any damage. And then the helicopter flew out of the skybox
Yeah,
So
yeah,
I
you
couldn't
told me
hit
about
it,
this.
and then I used my charged attack and was locked into an animation, and my character just stopped at the wall. My mech stopped at an invisible wall and then got hammered by 2 missile
Hmm.
volleys. And I was like, that didn't feel good when I was about to
No.
kill that thing. So that's my biggest like boss problem, aside from balancing and whatnot. The arenas are too small, Brett. They lock you at the borders in ways that the bosses then go out of them without
Yeah.
actually doing different movesets. I think that's the worst part of these
I
fights.
I definitely didn't run into it as much as you did, but the only examples for me are I mean, spoilers, there's two of them. The two helicopter fights are the only times
Yeah.
where this has happened to me. And I think it's just because more the second time than this time because they shrink the arena as when you get to that checkpoint, they shrink the
Hmm.
playable area of that map. Um, but yeah, it's annoying, and again, you just don't have that mission in particular. You don't have any long range options because they lock you into that loadout. But yeah, if
Yeah.
that happened to me, I would be super pissed off too.
And I think that's my biggest issue with that one fight. But I do think people did get filtered by that fight because they didn't try different strategies. And
Yeah, and that's
I
the other
think there
thing
would
is
have been a better way to push people to do that than
yeah,
just having the hard wall there.
I wonder because there like as we said, yes, there's the group of people that are going at the other people that weren't able to beat it and were just asking like how with the insults or whatever, whether they were meaning it jokingly or not.
Yeah.
But there are also the people that are like, oh well, I couldn't beat this boss, so the game's bad. And those are the people that I think
Yeah,
it was
absolutely.
probably meant towards because the game wasn't for you, and you tried to pretend that it was, and you were filtered. That is why it's called that. But the game isn't bad because the helicopter's there. You just needed to try something else. I don't know if that could have been like a
I
second
think the
mission or
place for
something,
this
or
is not a second mission, but if you die on the first run, it gives you a loading screen that's like you should try getting close or something. I think this is the one scenario what I would have advocated for it telling you what
yeah.
to do, so
Because
that
I
way
mean,
you
again,
you
if
learn that you have to try different things for different bosses.
yeah, because if we're going with the half of planet Earth's population didn't realize that this game had a story, they probably were not listening to Walter telling them to go up and hit it with your blade because he does say that.
Well,
I
it's
a menu
also
pop up would be
I
more
think part of
obvious,
like
so they
why
wouldn't
I
miss it.
didn't hear that at all, and I played that mission on 3 times. I think a lot of
Hmm.
that is just there's a lot going on in this game,
That is
and it is
true for a
sometimes
first time,
extremely
also.
difficult to hear what characters are saying mid fight. And I think later on they do a much better job of mixing audio so that it actually is hearable the entire time. But I think a lot of Walter's audio in particular is just hard to hear over
He's got those bassy
the din of
tones. They're very
gunfire.
missile-esque. I will say I was completely possessed by because I had to wait to play this game a few days because I was out on a trip with no way to play it. And so the whole time I was like, oh, this first thing is gonna make people drop it, dude. This is crazy. And so the whole time I was just like, I'm not gonna get filtered. I'm not gonna get filtered. I'm not gonna get filtered. I just barely with like 400 AP left or something. I did it on my first try, and I was like, okay, never mind. I had nothing to worry about. I went insane. Somehow I did it. I did it. Whatever. I got plowed in other areas of the game, but at least I did the helicopter on the first
Yeah.
try.
Now let's talk about the actual great filter, Brett.
Yes, the Great Wall
Good old ball
of
boy
Balteus.
Balteus. So this is a fight I have really mixed opinions on because
Hmm.
I think that what should have happened is the rest of the mission is a separate mission, and then the Balteus fight is its own mission
Hmm.
because the tutorial for the pulse thing is in the same mission as Balteus.
Yeah.
So you won't know to grab the pulse gun unless you read the description in the shop beforehand. But when you play the mission with Balteus in it, there's a bunch of dialogue, and one of the enemies in that mission is using a pulse gun, and I think most people would get the point then. Oh, I should use this for this fight. But if you
Yeah.
didn't buy it, you then have to go back out of the mission and buy it and go back in. And Brett, this happened to me, and I fought Balteus for 3.5 hours without a pulse gun.
That's comparable to the amount of time it took me, I think.
And I think it was too much. I think Balteus, and this is notably pre-nerf Balteus.
Yeah.
I haven't tried post-nerf Balteus with the loadout that I had tried it with originally, but this is one of those bosses where like your loadout makes or breaks the fight, which is a very Armored Core thing that I'm totally fine with. But I think in this scenario, the fact that you then have to leave the whole mission and come back in just feels bad. Of like, all right,
Yeah.
I didn't have the thing I need. I'm losing all the money that I made in the rest of this mission, so I got to go run another one to get enough to buy that pulse gun or redo my thing. Because this boss is beatable without it, but it really is a case of like, especially with the original tuning, it's just an attrition war of it keeps shielding itself. You have to do enough burst damage to get it to die, which is just not doable without weapons that are heavy hitters. So
Yeah, because I did not have I did not use the pulse guns for it because I was being too stubborn. I forget what my loadout was exactly, but I know it wasn't anything like crazy because they don't give you anything crazy for like Balteus is the threshold where they start giving you more
yeah, it's chapter
interesting
one.
things
Like
after
you
that.
have
It's
a very limited set of items to unlock before then.
But it's for me it definitely took a really long time, but the I at least for me I was so like absorbed in the soundtrack and the just the classic Ace Combat way that like the tension is built
Mm-hmm.
from friends yelling at you to do a better job uh over your comms while the music is building and building and building. I did not get angry at the fight because I was just like, this is awesome. I'm getting my ass kicked.
So
I'm
you want to
I'm
know
glad they
why I
didn't
got
hold
angry,
back.
Brett? Is not
Hmm.
them not holding back. It is what killed me on more than half of those runs was not the boss. It was me running out of ammo.
Oh no.
And this is the other issue that which they have since fixed. They buffed all of these weapons and gave them
Yeah, the
like
assault
double the ammo
rifles.
capacity. Because
Yeah.
I my first run through I was using the handguns. It was
Oh
handguns.
god, they're terrible. They didn't even buff them. They're still bad.
Oh, they're still bad, but they're really fun,
They're
and they
terrible.
do really good against most of the regular enemies. So you go, oh, I'll take this
Yeah.
boss fight. I ran out of ammo like 30 seconds into it because they have 100 shots. So
Hmm.
didn't work. Reload in with the assault rifle, run out of ammo because it had like 300 shots, and then I was like, okay,
Yeah.
well, now I'm gonna load in with the pulse blade and the other thing. And notably, Balteus is really easy if you get under him. Um,
Hmm.
but I had not had any parts that would allow me to speed up to him in the time frame that it would take for him to just turn around and go to the other side of the arena. So I had no parts to be fast enough. I had no weapons that did enough damage, and it was just like, okay, this feels not good. Like it's just like I have in this scenario, even if I'm doing my build crafting, I'm basically doing a challenge run because I didn't buy specific parts that
Hmm.
aside from the pulse armor or the pulse assault gun, I wouldn't have had an idea to buy. And I think that is really what the problem with Balteus came down to, is that it doesn't do a good job of signposting what you need to do that fight. And in particular, you have way less options in that fight than you do
Hmm.
for every other fight in the game.
Yeah,
Um,
that's the main reason that Belteus is difficult. Because if you try it again to S rank later on, it's
super easy.
really yeah, it's like an even fight, if not a very easy one, depending on what you're using. Because you can put more pressure on him with like no matter what loadout you have, like the kick or whatever that does a bunch of stun damage no matter what.
Yeah.
All these extra things that you can do that you unlock later in the game. But yeah, it's definitely. Again, this is the first time that we're gonna diverge on what we think about something because I can very easily see why, because certain fights later did this to me, why Balteus would cross just over into the frustration territory past the straight coolness factor that it had for me, which I maybe it's because I someday you will get to the boss Zenaida in Last Raven, and you may realize that if you were able to take this down before playing Armored Core 6, you may just be able to tolerate most things. But I honestly give my toleration to things like Balteus to some of the past fights in the older games that are just way more annoying and awful and horrible to deal with.
Yeah.
Because at least I think at least there's some fights that I definitely do not like in this game, but at least they have like mechanics, and they're not just like gray squares that shoot 90,000 rockets at you and kill you in 3 seconds, and they have like a million health. But yeah, it's no matter what way you slice it, it's not easy for a first time, and
And I do want to clarify, my problem with the boss isn't actually anything about Balteus itself. I think Balteus
it's
probably
the
didn't need the nerf. I think it's okay that it happened, because I do think that a lot of people get filtered at Balteus that otherwise would be fine. I think it's a difficulty spike that ends up being harder than basically the entire next chapter of stuff that you have to go against, in a way that doesn't feel great if you weren't prepared for it. And I think that the issue really comes down to it's super hard to be prepared for it because of the fact that it's so early on that you just don't have a lot of options. You're missing the core part of Armored Core of build crafting to actually be able to counter what the boss does in a way that makes sense, of like, especially because AC parts at the start are very expensive. Not what guns, but actually building your core.
Generators and stuff.
And if you're not doing the pulse gun, the most effective strategy against Balteus is to keep on its butt the whole time, as is FromSoft tradition. But to do that, you need the faster parts, which is really, I think, what it comes down to for me. It's just an awkwardly placed boss more so than a boss that's too difficult. Especially being that there's a number of later on bosses I think could have fit into this socket here and have been fine. All right. Any other thoughts about Big Ball Boy, Brett?
I don't know. I was a little sadder than you were that it got nerfed, because I mean, again, at least for me, I did not have as much of a bad time as you did, as a lot of people clearly did. And especially from the way that people were like posting about the things specifically that it had changed with like the missile tracking and stuff, and how it just made the barrage less cool looking. Really, uh, I was sadder because every so often FromSoft appears to threaten that they will stoop like too much in the what I would consider to be the wrong direction. Not because I don't think there should be easy games and I'm an elitist asshole, but because I think FromSoft is pretty well sat in their their assumed difficulty, and I don't want them to ruin it for themselves by trying to appeal to everyone and therefore appealing to no one. But it does not seem nearly as game ruining as anybody was afraid that it was going to be. If anything, it maybe helped people, like you said, get through a threshold that otherwise
I
they
think
would have
that's
enjoyed
really
the rest of the game.
what happened with it. I think Balteus is just placed awkwardly, and that it's a boss that would have been fine in the next chapter, but being the first thing that is like the first big wall that you hit, aside from the literal wall that you have to climb, it really just hits you in a different way. I think that brings up an interesting point about difficulty here, because I am of the opinion that if FromSoft were to ever do a difficulty select, this would be the game that doing it would make sense.
We've mentioned that before. I do remember
because I think mech games have two very different fan bases and audiences. I think Brett and I happen to fall into the fan base of mech games that is also fans of hyper difficult stuff, and so the way the game is fine. But for a lot of people, and often I would love to replay it in a mode that is more Project Wingman-y, of like, I can go in with my own build and just see the cool fights in a way that looks cool, but doesn't actually give me the rewarding, challenging experience of like a traditional FromSoft game. I think that would have been fine for this. I think an easy mode here maybe would have been warranted. uh, and I wouldn't be opposed to them adding it down the line because I think what they've kind of ended up in is the same situation as Sifu from a few years back, of a game that
Oh
was designed
yeah.
around like a very specific style of combat and whatnot that works really, really well, but is maybe just a little bit beyond what most people are even like physically capable of. Because there are moments in this game that are physically demanding that like I'm like, if I go to replay this in 20 years, I don't know that my reaction time will be fast enough to play.
I may be too old.
I may not have it in me anymore. Um, and I think that's a fair point about this one. I think in particular because this is so much more of an action game than Elden Ring or Dark Souls. It is much more along the lines of something like Sekiro. It's warranted to have some type of accessibility option here that is a
Yeah,
lower
and
difficulty. But
it's worth saying too that like Armored Core's had difficulty options, and maybe not since the start, but for a very long time. And it's
yeah,
kind of weird that this one doesn't have them. I wouldn't mind if like, because most of them have had like, let's take 4 and 4 answer on the
mm-hmm.
PS3 for as an example. They have normal mode, which is the only one you can play at the start, and the fights are a little bit difficult when they have to be, and the missions are really demanding if you're not doing exactly what they want you to. But that's what the briefings are for, and that's what build crafting is for, so you can do those things without having to struggle as much. And when you do normal mode, because all of the games are meant to be replayed over and over again anyway, you can do hard mode, and there'll be more enemies, things do more damage, like whatever things that have like warranted being in a hard mode or whatever, and you actually get different rewards and can do different paths from doing. I forget if it's 4 or 4 answer that way. But I wouldn't mind in retrospect, especially if I did not have the current relationship with the game that I do in this dimension of reality. If the game was released and everything was like all of like the bosses at least were like 10% easier or whatever, and that was the normal mode that everyone was what they had to play for the first run through. And then after you did a normal mode playthrough for New Game Plus or New Game Plus Plus, then you could either do it in normal again to get those
Especially because this
endings,
game expects you to
or
play New Game Plus, I would say.
exactly, yeah, having a harder mode, which is just like probably close to how it is right now, and then nerfed Balteus and slightly easier other things can be in the normal mode that everyone would have played first. I think that would be the best way to have done it.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, they can't really do that anymore because it's too late, and everybody. I'm sure there's people that haven't tried it yet. But everybody who was going to get it on day one has already gone past that point.
Like I
But
want
yeah,
the God of War difficulty select here. I want 4 options. Uh, have the difficulty it's at right now be either the second or the third in the line, and then have a harder difficulty for New Game Plus, because I think you and I probably both hit the point in New Game Plus where we're like, oh, well, everything's kind of easy now.
for the most part, yeah,
So I would like an option that's even harder than what exists currently, but I think this really would have been served with something that is like 10 to 20% less intense for
yeah.
people that want to opt into it. I don't know that having it be the default would be better, because I do think for people that are
Hmm.
fans of this level of difficulty, it's good to have that be the default. It retains the FromSoft sort of sense of achievement you get from completing the game on the intended difficulty, which is why I mentioned God of War, because you could call that "Give me Armored Core," and then you have
Yeah.
your regular Armored Core difficulty.
There you go.
I think FromSoft's just kind of opposed to doing difficulty select, which I understand and I agree with for most of their games, but I really think this is the
Yeah.
one that could have used it the most. And I think that's going to
Mhm.
be a controversial opinion, which is totally fine, but I think it's the thing
Yeah.
that, like, this is a game that will filter more people out than anything else. Um, all right, let's move past Balteus, because we're going to talk about Balteus again later. Uh,
Mm.
so let's get into
Mm.
the rest of the game. We're not going to call every boss up individually, but let's talk about the other wall bosses, I think, that get
Yeah.
commonly mentioned. So the next big one you run into is the Sea Spider. Uh,
Yes.
which this one surprised me. I did not know this boss was a wall.
Yeah.
And I think that's because when I played it, I had a build that was very good against it. I just happened to be playing a tetrapod with a bunch of heavy weaponry.
Yeah,
So I
that's
just
exactly
floated
what you
above it
need.
the whole time and beat it in 2 tries.
Yeah,
I
lucky
have
you.
since gone back to do this fight with normal like biped legs, and I understand it now. I understand the pain that people have felt, but
Hmm.
I don't think it was as bad as maybe some people have been making this fight out to be. I'm curious
Yeah,
about your thoughts.
as something, as your Dark Souls 3 Udex Gundyr filtered, you need something iconic that people are gonna get stuck at or get like made to stop playing the game by or whatever. I think Balteus fits that role way better and is much more iconic as a result than the Sea Spider. Um, I had a harder time with the Sea Spider than I did with Balteus, and I was using a quad, but it took me a while to be like, okay, no, like I don't want to have just like one or two bazookas. I want four bazookas.
Yeah, because the thing with the
Because
sea
that
spider is
is,
it sits in place a lot, unlike almost
it's
every other
yeah,
boss in the game, which lets you get off the harder hits.
yes, and it has a really, really, really stubborn stagger bar. At least in my experience, it feels like it takes a lot more to fill it than a lot of other things.
Yeah.
And if you're not either keeping up constant pressure on it, or which at this point I just was not good enough at the game to do that yet. Or uh, you just don't have that burst damage to unload four massive rockets at once onto it. It's not gonna get staggered, and therefore you're not gonna get the damage boost from doing that. So and then I so that was this was again I didn't get like crazy frustrated by it, but it definitely took me longer than Belteus. And I had to definitely take a break for a little bit so that I didn't get mad, because I wasn't even getting close for a while. It was like I was just getting absolutely trounced, and then it started flying, and I was like, "What the? They can do? They fly now?"
Fly now?
And but I don't know. It's fun. This is another thing that got nerfed, and I think the nerf for this was more understandable, because I think it just had like either a health decrease or it
It
became
did have
less.
one, so they nerfed an attack that it does, and I think it actually did. This attack did need to be nerfed because it would do like this weird laser spin that would just one hit you if it hit you on a
Oh,
lot
I
of
didn't even think
thresholds.
about that.
So in the aerial phase,
Uh,
and I don't actually know if this is the attack they nerfed because it's possible I just went back with higher armor later on and it didn't
mm,
one shot me. But the thing that I died to the first time I was fighting this was in the phase when it flies up in the air. What it'll do is it'll like go into this like spin motion and then hit
oh yeah.
everything around it. And there's a way to avoid it, which is like to either be way below it or just sit on top of it, which I learned the
Hmm.
second time. But if you get hit by that attack, it was basically instant death. Like it was so much
That makes
damage.
sense.
I think that probably got tuned down a little bit, and I also think the tuning for the this might just be entirely false. Like I don't know if this is correct because they didn't list what actually changed in the patch
I
notes.
wish they did, dude. It'd be
I
so much
super
fun.
wish they
Oh.
did. Is the like two lasers that it does back to back that have like the warning label? I think they lowered the threshold on like how hard it is to dodge those. It felt like the
Yeah,
tracking was a little worse.
yeah. In replaying since because I've been going through and getting S ranks. I haven't gotten them all yet, but when I was doing the one for Sea Spider, at least the two missile shots, it definitely felt like they didn't track as like demandingly. And I maybe it's not health, but it's like some resistance to either explosive, kinetic, or energy or
Yeah,
something also got hit because it definitely didn't take as long to kill. But I think unlike where I personally thought that nerfing Belteus's cool missiles was a little bit sad, not the end of the world, but a little bit sad. Nerfing Sea Spider was fine because even I didn't hate that fight, but even on like successful times, it's like it just took like forever.
yeah. Also,
It
there's
just had
just a lot of
so much
bosses in
health.
this game. I think it's fair that some of them are probably you don't need every one of the bosses in this game to actually be a boss level encounter because there's so many of them and so many of them are back to back. And I think
Yeah.
boss fatigue is a real thing with this one. There were I was very happy that Starfield came out right after this and I could take a break from the
That's fair.
bosses and then get back to it. Yeah, I think that absolutely was a case. All right, so Sea Spider is also like a big story point where you're hopping to the other continent. So let's jump backwards a little bit because I do want to mention the Strider mission being really cool.
Yes,
First,
that's true.
because we didn't
Yeah.
talk about Strider. This is one of the earlier missions. This is the one that everyone talked about in pre-release of you're climbing a big mining robot to go destroy its eye thing on the back. Super cool mission. I wish we got another one kind of like this at some point.
Yeah, because just like, I mean, Armored Core 4 Answer really like introduced that idea of having like there's these arms forts which are just like city-sized, massive expanses of just like landing pads and missile launchers and
Yeah.
like anti-capital ship
Like, I
cannons
really
on
wish
like
we had a
walking cities.
PCA thing in the later half that was like a PCA heavy warship or something that was actually just
Yeah, something
like
like that would
you
have been
fight
cool.
on top of it, and that is the stage. And we kind of
Yeah,
get
and I
something similar to that, but it's not. I don't think it fills the same role.
Yeah, and I don't think the game is worse off in this state. I think it's more of just
Yeah,
like this one thing is so cool that I think we just would have liked to see more of it.
because it's a
Because
highlight
just
of
like
every playing it back is just
yeah,
super fun.
and it's because it's not even really hard. It's like you can screw it up. Like you could fall off or just like get hit by too many things at once, or get like just stand still like an
It just has a
idiot in the
really
middle
good
of the
sense
eye
of scale
laser.
and spectacle
Yeah.
that feels really good. Same with I think
Mhm.
that there are a number of missions that are like that. Of like the wall climber mission is very much like that.
Yes.
A lot of the ones that involve you with AI pilots being your buds are like that. And
Hmm.
I wish there was maybe another one of those towards the end of it because I think in like in between chapter 4 and 5 you kind of lose out on some of that. Uh,
Yeah, a little bit.
but yeah, Strider's super cool. This variant of it we'll talk about later that became my most hated mission in the game.
Yeah.
uh,
Yeah.
Aside from that, the other bosses that we're kind of jumping over here are the Juggernaut fight, which is I think I think I would have just swapped to the order of Balteus and Juggernaut at certain points of like
I can yeah,
because I think
I can
the
see that.
Juggernaut is actually wait does the Balteus does come
Is it?
after
I
Juggernaut,
think
doesn't it?
it comes
Um,
after, but yeah, I
I would have
understand
pushed something
why.
of the level of Juggernaut after or after it as well, and had like another warm up
Yeah,
before Balteus. Maybe the Smart Cleaner or something. I think
yeah. Smart cleaner before Belteus would have been a smart idea. I
yeah,
think.
I feel like any build is a lot more capable of taking on the Smart Cleaner than any build taking on
Yeah, pretty
Balteus.
much.
The Juggernaut fight I like because it is very effective at teaching the kind of core idea of this game, which is like a lot of enemies will have weak points that you need to be at a certain height or behind them or
Mhm.
something to fight. You get your AI buddy for part of the fight, which is very fun.
Little Rusty,
This is the introduction to Rusty, who I think
best
is
boy.
unequivocally the best boy of this game that everyone loves.
Absolutely.
This
Mhm.
is your buddy cop in the buddy cop movie.
Yeah, he's literally if you just take soloing Pixie out of Ace Combat Zero and you put him into a different game, he's just literally that character one to one. And I
Yeah.
don't even care about plagiarism because he should be in more things because
Every
he's a really good
game like
character.
this needs a soloing pixie,
It's
or
exact.
your
You.
prez if you were using
Yes,
wingman
yes.
terms. But
You need somebody to call you buddy and to be like at least as cool as you, but they're a computer
especially because
character.
you're playing a
So
silent character, I think having someone that is
yeah,
unequivocally like in your camp at the start is just very helpful
yeah,
for the player to get someone to attach to. I think that's definitely a thing of like if Rusty didn't exist, I think it would have been hard for a lot of people to find a character to attach to. And it's also Rusty is the
yeah.
reason that people who say this game doesn't have a story are insane. Like
Literally, like he's just like he's the character. There's what more do you want from him? I don't know. He's the perfect boy.
yeah, and Balteus also introduces us to Air, who's your
Mhm.
Rubiconian coral wave friend. That's your other pilot buddy, and I think that's something that this game accomplished very well, is having
Yeah.
the voices in your head be very fun to listen to, if that makes
Yes.
sense.
And we talked about Walter before, but he's your like handler, your guy that gives you the missions and stuff.
It's
That's in every
startlingly
AC
less
game.
sinister than I think the marketing led us to believe.
Yeah, I like. I mean, because
Walter seems like a
this
stand-up guy, to be honest.
I know this like because this comes into play in this story run through, so it's not super
Yeah.
spoilers until we get to the next ending. But like through all the marketing, I think everybody unanimously was like, okay, your handler is gonna be like the
villain.
asshole from the start
Everyone
this
was like, your
time, and he's
handler is
gonna
going to be the
be
villain.
it's yeah, like you're gonna fight him later on, and it's gonna be like finally I can take care of this guy, get him out of my way, so I could do whatever I really have to do or whatever. But like he starts that way where he's like really just suspicious, and you're this just thing that he's taking advantage of completely, and you're in the situation where you just have to do what he says like all the time, and he's not very nice about it either until he starts being a little bit nice about it and starts being like, hey, don't 61 don't get any bad manners from those red guns, okay? You're better than that, okay? Or 61 take a little bit of a rest after this mission. You seem tired. We'll rest up before the next one. It's just like, but Dad, I want to play my big robot game. I don't want you just keep being mean. I wasn't meant to feel like you actually cared a little bit. This is very strange.
I wasn't
But
ready
yeah,
for
he just
feelings in my big
becomes.
robot game.
I know. Yeah, it became less of him using you to for his own goals, which is still part of it, and more of like him just kind of giving you like tough love as somebody he actually cares about. It's very interesting, and I have not seen
Especially because
a
you
character like
get like
this.
Walter has how the doctor from Metal Gear,
Oh, which one?
the one that screams snake whenever you die. Walter
Oh,
does the same.
yeah, the one from MGS1, the lady
Yeah.
who injects you with the silly virus. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. I can't
Yeah.
remember her name for the life
I
of me though.
or your other all your party members do it, and or not party members, but companion characters do it in Metal Gear
Yeah, like
Solid V.
Colonel
Um,
or in 5, yeah.
yeah, you have Walter. Walter will sound distressed when you die in a
Yeah,
way that's
yeah.
like clearly more than just, oh, I lost a tool. And I think that's very fun. Of like over the course of the game, you get more detailed responses as you've kind of progressed in a relationship with your side characters and all that, which is not something I expected from this game. Like I came in not
Yeah,
expecting a
seriously.
story because none of the reviews mentioned the story being like a high point, which I think is fair to say. I do think the story is maybe not for most people expecting current AAA. It's not a high point, but for me it was like it's
Same,
absolutely
yeah.
hit what I wanted it to hit. Um, and yeah, let's get further in and talk about more of the story stuff, I think, because we've got a lot to say. So we talked about Rusty, which I think is a good time for us to talk about the Ice Worm
Yes,
and
that's
our
the
other series
next
of
big
missions
boy
involving
boss.
Rusty. Ice Worm is the gimmick boss. This is
And it's the
the
best one.
this is by
It's the best
far,
one.
I think, the best gimmick boss that FromSoft has ever done, because anyone who has played this mission will never forget the line that I won't miss.
Never.
Anytime this
It's peak. It's peak. I'm sorry.
it's
It's
the
peak.
peak of Armored Core and the peak of FromSoft.
uh,
And this is the moment, like this mission outside of the rest of the game is a 10 out of 10. It's like
mhm.
the perfect gimmick fight, I think. And it's still decently difficult, but it's also not like this is clearly not one of the harder fights of the game because they want you to
Yeah,
succeed
yeah.
here. But you get a whole cadre of followers here. All of you've interacted with various factions like Balaam and Vespers at this point, or Archivus, who are your corpos that the story kind of revolves around. Rusty belonging to Archivus, and then this mission kind of brings everyone together for an uneasy alliance to defeat this big threat. Classic
Mhm.
storytelling trope. And very, very well executed because you're seeing all these characters interact that you wouldn't have otherwise gotten the chance to see them interact.
Yeah.
And I think this really shows the strength of this game because most of these characters get less than maybe 2 minutes of VO time over the entire game, and yet all of them have very strong characters.
Yeah, I like just in general, and I forget if this was on another episode or something that we did, but I know we talked about it at some point together where just like I've never seen this happen before where none of these characters in game have a face. They're not identifiable visually outside of their AC at all, or like the emblem that they
Yeah.
use to like as like a call sign or whatever. And the amount of just like fan art, like well done fan art, and just like fan appreciation of these characters who you never see, but they're acted and written so well that like you just like yeah, I totally 150 million% see like Rusty as like your cool fellow pilot guy with like a cool haircut, some scars, and the pilot's jacket, whatever. Like I totally see that, or I totally see Michigan being either your drill sergeant esque character, or just like your jaded military guy who now just wants to pilot and have a fun time yelling at everybody. And it's like because they're just I something in the writing and like when and how they say their lines and just like how they're acted, like all their voices are so different. There's so many different weird like accents and
Yeah.
inflections
And
and
a lot of it, I think,
everything.
is that
It's
the writing here
great.
is a lot more direct than other FromSoft games. I think for a good reason of like this is set in a more
Yeah.
relatable to most people scenario of like megacorps and armored cores. Yeah, are like a big difference, but it's a mecha show, and the pilots are the characters, which are
Yeah.
just humans piloting big robots. And it really feels like that. Like you kind of get to see the human behind, even though you never see a human in this game.
Hmm.
Um, but you learn the character of everyone from these small interactions, and I think it actually makes it the weight of a lot of the later decisions a lot heavier because you know what the
Absolutely.
stakes are. You understand what you're doing, and especially the reason that this game is good for multiple playthroughs is because they lean into that. Uh,
Yeah.
and yeah, so
Like there's
that
a story or something.
it's almost like there's a story. So after Worm, you also get the cool moment before the Ice Storm of fighting Raven, uh, the
Yes. Yeah.
person that you stole the call sign from in their mech, and you
Yeah.
learn that whatever group Raven was a part of did something bad that the PCA don't like. That I don't think we
It's
ever
yeah.
actually learned more about. It's hidden
It's
somewhere.
up in the air, and now with all the things that at least I know, I'm perfectly fine with accepting it as a reference to in real life in all the old games the pilots used to be called Ravens.
Yeah,
So
that's what I figured.
here's your cool little callback. I mean, you stole. I don't think anybody expected to actually fight the guy, because everyone like that was. It happens in the first mission. You steal a call sign to get a fake ID and be allowed on the planet or whatever. And oh, it just so happens to be Raven. Haha, funny reference. Thank you, FromSoft. The game is back, everybody! Hooray! The franchise isn't dead. But then you actually fight him, like the guy that you stole it from. It never used to be a guy, but now it's a guy. And it's just there's two versions of the mission you can get, where there's one where he ambushes you in the middle of a duo AC fight to make it a trio AC fight and be very difficult.
Yeah,
But
which is
I
I believe
personally
that option is
prefer
not available into New Game Plus to do that one.
um
I don't
I
think you can
forget.
make
I'm
the
not
choice that you
sure.
need to do that until New Game Plus, which
Yeah,
makes sense because
maybe.
it is way harder in that version.
It is
Like
way harder,
huge difficulty
and
spike.
I also think it's way less cool
Yeah,
because in the one where it's just him, you have a mission to defend a place from a thing, and you get there, and before the mission even starts, everything's destroyed, and everyone's just like, "What the hell happened here? Something must have gone wrong." And silhouetted against the red burning sky is Raven's AC, and he just turns around, and his handler's like, "Let's see how far they can get on stolen wings," and the fight starts, and it's just, it's
yeah.
awesome. It's so cool.
No, it's great. It's a great job the voice actors did here of giving weight to things that are nonsense. Like the "let's see how far
Absolutely.
you can fly on borrowed wings" is a nonsense line, but it's so cool,
But
Brett.
it's
It's
so
so
cool.
cool. I love it so
It's
much.
so awesome.
Um, yeah,
Uh,
absolutely. I think this is one of the better parts of the game for sure. Of like this chapter 3 rush of really cool stuff is very fun because there's a
yeah,
ton of
yeah.
back-to-back missions that are really good. It's your first introduction to the PCA, who's kind of the villain for the
Yes.
next chapter of this closure administration trying to prevent the corpse from gaining the power of Coral and all that.
Hmm.
And you get to fight a lot of very cool weaponry. Basically, it's an excuse for there to be a cool outer space set of weapons.
Yeah.
Though I will say, I don't know if you'll agree on this. I think the single hardest mission in the game for me, aside from New Game Plus Plus stuff, is the mission where you have to fight the heavy warship after getting all the survey data for Arquebus or something.
I can see that,
And
yeah.
I was so unprepared for what the second half of that mission
Yeah.
was going to be. And I had made the choice beforehand that I wanted to save for like an expensive torso part or something, so I hadn't bought some of the cool weapons that were in the shop. And so I had to do that with, again, a loadout that was probably suboptimal. I think that was definitely the hardest non-boss mission in the game.
That's a fair one to have.
Every other fight beyond it, nope, haven't had any issues with redoing that mission ever. So I don't know what it was. I don't know if I was having an off day or something, but it was an incredibly difficult mission the first time I tried it.
It's just one of those. It's because halfway through you have a complete and total objective shift that is absolutely unrelated to what you were there to do in the first place. That I don't think they talk about in the briefing at all.
Yeah, and I really think it's your first exposure to fighting a like mini boss type enemy while there are still regular enemies in the area.
Yes, and if you
I
don't
think that's probably what the wall was for me, but
yeah, and that's understandable because if you don't get the idea to like wait, these things don't actually have like any health at all. I can just go and punch the bridge and it dies and explodes, and I can just fight the little guys by themselves now. If you do like, depending on how long, because it just flies in from like a mile away, right? And it takes a really long time to get in super close. So if you're like low on boost because you're fighting all the guys that are immediately there, if it can really easily lead to like a perfect mixture.
This is also
where you're
another
just not
one,
gonna
Brett,
get the chance.
where why is the box so small? Why is the box that I fight in so restricted? Because this one especially, there are enemies that drop on this top level, and you just can't. And it's like a big ice sheet. There should be plenty of space, except you can't move past like a couple of meters from the ice sheet. So you're fighting enemies on this tiny ledge. I'm like, well, why couldn't this have just been bigger? Just like let me move around a little bit up here. I think that mission in particular was the one, aside from the first helicopter encounter, where it felt really rough to me because you end up, they like put enemies on this top level, and then there's just no space to fight them in, and it means you're ending up like having to boost over the rest of the enemies, which is probably why they did it. I imagine as they wanted you to still be next to the other enemies, but it just doesn't feel good. Like it feels very restricting. But I think that problem kind of went away after this fight, for me at least. All right.
Yeah.
Any other chapter 3 call-outs we want to mention? Cataphract is pretty cool, where you have to like aim your shots for the center.
Yeah, I didn't even do that fight the first way through for me, but that is one of the things where one of the people that I was streaming for was like, oh, for my New Game Plus run through where I had to actually do it this time. They were like, oh, I'm so excited to see you do Cataphract. This boss looks awesome. It looks like a Metal Gear. I wonder how tough of a time you're gonna have with it. And I had dual soup, so I did it on my first try because the missiles just stun it so easily. But it was still really, really fun because it moves so fast. And unlike what you just said, the arena is just wide open snowfield of just like sweeping
that and the Ice
snow hills.
Stand out so much, I think, because you never hit an edge of like. I think it's the same arena, but there's huge arenas.
Yeah.
Which I think these fights feel better in that. And yeah, I think a lot of the PCA fights are pretty fun. It's fun to take on a lot of enemies that are harder than your average ones, but not too difficult. So I did a lot of the PCA stuff. All right. After that, we move into Chapter 4, which had the maybe worst boss in the game, but I feel bad calling it a boss. Yeah. You want to talk about
Ibis the Chapter 3 finality boss?
No, Chapter 4 finale.
It's 4? Okay, never mind. I thought it was 3.
We'll talk about Ibis. So Chapter
can't skip that.
4 has the worst boss in the game, which is maybe not a boss, and I don't mean worst as in the bad sense, but the weakest one. Good old Nepenthes, the little turret at the bottom of the elevator that you drop down.
I think it was a mistake to give it a boss health bar.
I do too.
Everybody hates on it so much. It doesn't need it because it dies in 2 hits, and it's a cool set piece. I like it.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it out.
It's a classic. No, yeah, I wouldn't even change it at all because, like, yeah, it's a high damaging thing. If ignore what you're supposed to do or are really bad at executing.
Which is
like,
use the
fall
big
and land on the
platforms
platform.
all over the room to block the shots.
Yeah.
Just very easy.
It's an Armored Core classic in missions that used to be really annoying and horrible because they did not realize that you could just have big platforms to block the shots. But finally, with the advent of this generation of consoles, they finally have the technology to put big platforms in front of the lasers to block the shots. And the mission's fun. But yeah, having it as a boss is a questionable decision because it just doesn't need a health bar. You just go down and blow it up, and it wouldn't change anything.
Yeah, there's a lot of missions here that you end up fighting AC-like bosses that are
the Enforcer.
pretty tough. The Enforcer and the Ephemera thing. I think a lot of the missions here are legitimately very good ones of you like delving down this long pipe system to
cool.
find the city underneath, and you're having to take on a lot of people that you've been working with over the course of the game to get to do that, basically.
Yeah.
Enforcer, I think, is one of the weirder fights. So Enforcer, to me, is a really fun boss, but it's the one that made me go, it feels weird that every boss now has pulse armor.
Yeah.
I think in particular, that it just doesn't... The pulse armor to me feels like a crutch that they used for a lot of these bosses.
Exactly. If you're... So and we've talked about this before too, I'm less angry about the staggering as a concept than you are, but I understand why, because it doesn't feel the greatest all the time. I think more of a problem
the stagger is not... I don't hate the idea of stagger. I hate that it is the core of the combat.
Yes, yeah. Having so many bosses with shields on top of that is like, why have...
You now are working through 3 layers of defenses.
It's annoying.
It's not even that,
so many
like,
bosses have it.
Because when the pulse armor's up, you just feel like you're accomplishing nothing. Like that, I think is the real part of the problem. Is you feel like you're accomplishing nothing, even if you break it, because oftentimes, like, you have to use your big attacks to break this pulse armor. You're gonna be out of stuff at the end, so you've got to go in for like a kick or something. You feel like, oh, I wasted my time. And then a lot of the bosses seem to have triggers at HP thresholds where they'll put the pulse armor up again, with no regard to like when they used it last. And for Enforcer especially, I noticed that that pulse armor like went up repeatedly right after, I think, at like a halfway point, and it was just super frustrating.
And another one of the bosses that we'll get to, I think it's a combination of it's definitely a health threshold that it'll put it up again, but it's also like a countdown separate from that like whenever you broke it, it'll start a countdown where eventually it'll come back up again. But like you said, unless you have like the perfect scenario where you either have like the best loadout for the situation or you're on top of your game or whatever, all your cooldowns are going off because you just used all of your shit to break the shield, and now you don't have anything left for 5 seconds or whatever. And it's exaggerating; it's like 2 seconds or something. To actually take advantage of the fact that you've busted the shield. So if you're not exactly prepared to deal with it, compared to how differently every other non-shielded enemy plays in the game, it's really annoying. And I definitely had some trouble with it at first because literally exactly that.
If the goal was just to increase how long it takes to kill the boss, just add that to the health pool. I
would rather have
weird
that,
shield. Like I would much rather have because the health feels like you see a visible mark of your progress.
Yeah, at least
the pulse armor is just annoying. Like I get it for Balteus, because I think for Balteus it works well as like, here's how to counter this when you see it later. But then they just throw it on every boss so that you can never be prepared for them to have that.
Yeah.
And they also often feel like, well, the pulse guns aren't great, so
no,
it doesn't feel good when you have to use them because they look really lame.
I I enjoy referring to them as the doohickeys or the thingamabobs because they just look like some strange mechanism that is just on your hands on a giant robot. But this is also the boss where I started having a repeated frustration that I now can confirm is not just me, but is one of the things that it has straight up killed me before. And is just another one of the massive... It's just a nitpick, but it weighs massively on my opinion of the game. It's just sometimes I press button, thing doesn't happen. I have full
Especially with repair
energy.
kits.
With repair kits, I think you can't be shooting when you repair. So if you have like a Gatling gun or whatever, you can't repair while shooting.
Yeah.
But sometimes, again, you gotta mash it more than once. Sometimes I'd have to mash a million times in a row just to get a jump off. And the thing that would kill me the most is I won't deny it. I'm a fan of the pile bunker. We're all fans of the
Oh,
pile bunker
same.
here. How can you
Absolutely,
not
Brett.
be? It's efficient to have another weapon in your hand and switch to the pile bunker as a little 1-2 when the thing's stunned. But when I mash the bumper a million times in a row after my weapon is done firing and it doesn't
So
swap to
from
pile
what I can
bunker,
tell, because this is the reason that I stopped using the pile bunker on most of my missions, because the pile bunker as a weapon, super fun, isn't great without something to initiate with, because it's a
that's the
wacky
thing.
weapon.
It is a wacky weapon. It's really easy to miss with it, right? Because you don't have
Yeah.
any forward momentum at all. Almost, you need to be like right in front of the thing you want to destroy, and then if you are, it'll do it. But if you're like even an inch away, it'll whiff, and you feel like a silly
Mm-hmm.
billy, and you'll die basically. But this is not a mechanic. I don't even know if this is because it can't be a controller thing. Uh, but the way that I found out that this wasn't just me going insane is I would be upset about this and I would complain about it to Wrestle Ryan because he was watching me at most of my low points in this game when I would get really upset because this kept happening to me. Uh, and he'd just be like, I don't know, I don't have that problem. I started playing some PvP matches against one of my Xbox friends. And I was like, hey, you just use like back turrets all the time. If you want to use melee weapons more, why don't you just put one on your back? If you want to use your dual whatever's, you could just do the same thing and then switch into it. And he was like, "Oh, I this is his first Armored Core game, and he was using just the same thing over and over and had not realized that that was
Mm-hmm.
a thing." And I was like, "Just do it, try it out." Uh, if you do not time that shit perfectly, the animation will not happen and you will not switch your weapon. And it
Yeah.
kept happening to me, and it started to happen to him over and over, and I kept beating him because it wouldn't switch to his other weapon. And he was like, finally, finally, I get it. This is so frustrating. Fuck you, Brett. Why would you do this to me? And he got mad at me for telling him to try out the strategy. And I was
Mm-hmm.
like, now you know. Now you understand. And it screwed me over so much. But it doesn't happen all the time, so it's not like a definite thing. It has to be like there's some frame of like after firing certain weapons, if you press the bumper to switch, that it just will not actually
No, what I
switch.
think it
And
is,
it's
Brett,
so
I don't
frustrating.
think this game has input buffering at all. I think that's the
Probably not.
problem, which it needs. Like, absolutely,
For
this
that
is
especially.
especially for the case of healing and the case of swapping weapons. Because
Yeah.
I got this down to a science, Brett, because my favorite build to run with for part of this game was Rocket Lance and Pile Bunker. The
Yes, the
combo
wombo
1-2
combo.
punch. And there's a really unique quirk with that where you can swap to the Pile Bunker after the charged Rocket Lance second hit.
Yes.
You can't swap to the Pile Bunker after the uncharged Rocket Lance second hit, with no indication of why. It feels awful. It feels so horrible. So I stopped using it because I was like, it's so unreliable as a thing. It feels like if it was
Yeah,
reliable, it would be so much more fun to do. Um,
exactly.
and yeah, I totally agree with you. That's a huge problem. All right, let's move on to some of the other wild fights in this thing, because this is the time you got to fight Rusty. Your first Rusty
Yes.
versus you fight. You got to fight him
Yeah,
because
yeah.
someone. This is your first inkling that the corps are onto something, funky, because they send
Hmm.
Rusty to trail you, and then he's been told to kill you, but he doesn't like it.
Yes.
But he still has to do it because your mission is to kill him, which you also don't
Hmm.
like, presumably. And
He still
thankfully,
calls you
neither of you
buddy.
does. This is not the mission
No,
where
yeah.
you fight and murder your friend, but it is, this is where the emotions start to get me, Brett. And then you get the classic mission with Ibis. So Ibis is the other boss that got
Yes.
nerfed, and we're gonna talk about Ibis a little bit, because Ibis, I think, is, for a lot of people, wasn't for me, but I definitely have seen sentiment that this is the hardest boss in the game for a lot of people. Um,
If you if you were a fly on the wall for my attempts fighting Ibis, you would think lesser of me as a person.
Okay, well, let's before we get into your tips about Ibis, let's talk about Moonlight, because you get Moonlight in this level. You get the
Yes.
Moonlight Greatsword equivalent,
Yeah.
which is very cool because it shoots out cool waves
It's so
of
sick.
energy. I basically ran with it for the rest of the game after this because it felt very usable too, of like
It's very
startlingly
fun.
good for being what is essentially a referential weapon. Um,
Hmm.
and I want to, before we talk about Ibis itself, talk about what happens when you go to get the Moonlight, because they
Of
found
course.
a way to stick the goddamn skeleton pinwheels in this game,
Yeah,
Brett,
the bone wheel skeletons are
which
there. Yep.
are the worst enemies in the game. Hated them, even though they're pretty easy to deal with, to be honest. But super,
Yeah. Well, they're easy to deal with one on one. When you put 18,000 of them in one corner and a
yeah,
chest in the middle, they knew exactly what they were
they knew
doing.
what they were doing. I went down,
Um,
got it, and then ran away and didn't fight any of
it's
them.
yeah, smart, smart. Um,
Uh, all
that
right,
that whole mission before the fight is interesting because it's two ACs, then a bunch of enemies. No, sorry, two ACs, then the bone wheels. If you choose to fight them, which there is reason to, because each one of them is a combat
yep.
log, which you get special rewards for killing all of them. Then more enemies, and then what people would consider, and I wouldn't really argue against them as being one of the hardest, if not the hardest bosses in the game. So rebuilding to fight Ibis with different builds means you also have to fight Ibis with a build that's good at killing two ACs
Especially
and
if you want
is
to S rank
maneuverable
this mission.
enough. Yeah, S ranking especially, which thankfully it's a lenient S rank. You don't have to do it perfectly, but you still have to like try. You can't get like destroyed before you fight Ibis. Um, I found basically you couldn't use more than like one or two of your heals before getting to the Ibis, or else you just get an A rank instead. Um, but it's that combined with we'll get into the fight itself made me almost dislike this mission. This is the closest I got to being really frustrated in a bad way at something before I actually got frustrated by it in a way where I would dislike that part of the game. I think it's very hard, almost too hard, for me at least. And in order to beat it my first time, I did um double stun needle launchers, which is the weapon you get for killing the worm.
Yeah,
And I think pile bunker on one hand and something else on the other that would just do big damage because the instances you get for actually being able to hit it are very slim.
tiny.
It's like it does not stand still ever,
So
and
this was the
you really
fight for
have to
me
rely on your
that
targeting.
I didn't have a huge amount of difficulty with this. I think my build when I was fighting this was the laser lance, and a couple of ranged weapons that weren't like the busted ones, and then a stun needle
Hmm.
launcher, just a single one, because the stun needle launcher is just very fun, even aside from it
Yeah,
being one of the best shoulder weapons in the game.
in
So I
this fight
ran
it's
with
really good too.
one of them for most of it, just because it's super fun. Um,
Hmm.
and this fight, I think, has a problem of invalidating a lot of mid-range weapons just because
Straight up,
Ibis moves so
completely.
quickly that like any
Yeah,
grenade launcher, anything that shoots a rocket, anything that has any travel time is useless because Ibis
yeah.
moves so fast and so often that it's just you need a huge amount of time. So on New Game Plus, I did this fight with my full laser build, which was laser handguns and then two laser cannons, easiest fight in the game. Because like with
Yeah,
that build,
that makes
it
sense.
does tons of damage. I think I had to swap one of the laser cannons out for the stun needle because I just wasn't staggering it at all with the lasers. But
Hmm.
it was not a huge challenge. But unless you had like hyper specific builds, and any kinetic rifles just felt useless because you can't hit the boss at all, really.
So the way that I S ranked this, and I did this either yesterday or the night before. I did I have a cosplay build of White Glint from Armored Core for Answer because they just give you the parts for it. And it's really easy. And it just has missiles and two assault rifles, and I was able to do it with the buff that they gave to assault rifles. That's how I got the S rank because if you keep on, this is one of the bosses where if you're only using soft lock, good luck, because I had
Yeah.
you to keep track of
That
it
was the
for
thing too. Like I had to start using hard lock on this boss because
it's
I
yeah
hadn't been using it
because it's so
before.
fast.
It's just too fast.
Yeah,
It,
but
and
if
it does the thing where it flies behind your camera intentionally,
yeah,
which
exactly.
is the hard luck exists to solve that problem, so it's fine. But it is also just
Hmm.
very aggravating as a mechanic if you're trying to do any kind of soft lock run.
Yeah. But yeah, just using that and constantly like over boosting at it and kicking it and hitting it with the rifles was able to just stagger it over and over and actually did not have a very hard time with it at all, and it was really satisfying. But before the buffs that the assault rifles got, you probably would not be able to do that with them
And the
at all.
nerfs that I just got as well. Of
And yeah, which I don't know what they nerfed exactly.
I think they just nerfed
I think
damage values on stuff, which feels
I
reasonable because you get hit a
yeah
lot in this fight just by random things. Um,
yeah.
Ibis is a big fan of throwing little drones out that shoot you from
Hmm.
angles you can't see, which is
It's
always
yeah, and if
fun.
you don't happen to be moving like perfectly or just be using a very fast build, you're just gonna get chipped,
Yeah.
sometimes to death.
And this is
Um,
also another one of the fights where I don't know if you've tried this on tank treads. I really
I've not.
wanted to make tank treads work for most of this game, and they just don't. There's a lot of times here
Oof.
where there's a tread you unlock really late in the game that is fine and does work for a lot of these fights, but because you're so grounded, so many of these bosses, especially Ibis, will just fly into the sky and then not let you hit them.
Yeah.
And it's just really, really obnoxious for any tank build because it feels like every other build has a way to deal with that, and I think that's okay. Like I don't think it's a huge issue, but it does mean I don't know when I would play a tank build in this game because every boss is designed this way. Like it's a case
Hmm.
of there's very few bosses that aren't in this archetype aside from like the AC fights.
Yeah. Here's my hot take that I just came up with. Ricocheting shouldn't be a mechanic, and they could just
Yeah,
remove
ricocheting's
it
dumb.
from the game, and the game would probably be better for it, honestly.
Yeah,
Because it just
ricochet
means
is
that, like,
really silly.
even if you manage to pepper something outside or even still inside your gun's like ideal range listed as a stat. I was watching a couple videos earlier. If I can, I'll try to find the guy's channel also because it does really good stuff, specifically for AC6. Um, but even if you hit things in that range, they'll still ricochet if they hit at all. So I think the least that you could do is at least have normal or like slightly reduced damage values instead of the bullets just bouncing off and doing like
Hmm.
2 damage or something. Because it's just it. There's no long range play in this game. It does not exist as a play style. And as a franchise that used to have sniper rifles and like long range cannons and stuff, it doesn't have that anymore, and that's very very sad.
Yeah, it just makes a lot
The
of builds
guy
impossible to do.
Exactly, yeah. The guy's channel is Chrigt, CHRIGHTT, and literally just his whole channel right now is going through like half an hour long breakdowns of every single energy firearm, detailed breakdown, every single generator, and how that affects your energy weapons, FCS builds and stuff. I'll actually put this in our chat so you can see it too, because it's
Yeah,
actually
I've been following
uh
his videos as well. Very good.
okay, yeah, because he's useful for anybody who's interested in build crafting specific stuff in the game too. But like I learned it from him that basically to a certain degree there is just like a certain range where nothing will hit at all unless it's like one of the super heavy back cannons, and even then you have to be lucky with the tracking
Or you need
and
an
your
enemy
enemies
to
movement and
stop
stuff.
for a little bit.
Yeah, which Ibis does not
It's
ever
like the only fights in
almost.
the game where I actually got to do a long range build, which were super fun, were the fights where you defend things. So you had like the
Yeah,
two
yeah.
defense missions where they throw enemies at you in lines, and you get to actually have a longer range plan there, and that was really fun. And I wish I could do that
Hmm.
for other parts of the game, but it really was only those two missions where it felt like I could. Um, and yeah, Ibis is it's a hard fight. I really like the Ibis fight. I think it's very cool.
I
I
agree.
do wish that it was maybe just a little bit less mobile, because I think it's just such
Hmm.
a or the windows of opportunity were bigger without staggering it for heavier builds to be a little bit more effective. Because it really does feel like you just have to chase the thing the whole time.
Yeah,
Um,
seriously.
but aside from
And it
that,
has
it's
a
really
second
fun.
phase. So
Yeah.
if you that I remember the first time I thought I did it, and I was like, oh my god, I've been
Same.
at this for like half an hour. Oh fuck yes! If I like
So it took
I
me
straight
forever
up
to
like
get the first phase down. It did not take me very long to get the second phase down. Once I had gotten the first phase down.
it took me so long to get there again, dude. I was getting absolutely screwed. It was borderline infuriating, but
Yeah.
again, right up, just barely meeting that threshold before I would say I genuinely disliked it. I still think that's it. It like at that point, you
But
are
also
set up to
weird because
be
it's
able to
basically the
handle
hardest
something
boss
like
in the
that.
game at this point. Because I'm thinking of like bosses I had trouble with
Definitely.
afterwards, and we'll talk about one of them, I'm sure, because we both had issues with it. But I think
Mhm.
for the rest of them, by far, Ibis was the actual boss that was hardest in terms of what comes
Yeah.
afterwards. Yeah. All right, that's end of chapter 4, where you get the big switcheroo and learn, uh-oh, Stinky V2 Snail's a little twat and has hit you with the needle launcher that you made. And you get a
Mhm.
mission of you, however you can move in your meat sack, getting into another AC, and then moving out and trying to
This
get
is a
back.
cool mission.
This is
I
a
liked this
cool
a lot.
mission. I really do just want to know. I want the definitive answer: is 621 a pile of meat? Because if so,
Yeah,
how did
really.
they get in the other AC? I
It's
want an
true.
answer because the fan artists need to know, Brett. Does 621 have functioning limbs or not?
He just inchwormed his way in like a
Because I
SpongeBob
think we have
character.
to assume that it's functioning limbs. Uh, yeah, it's super interesting mission, and it's also where Walter is killed out of sight. You kind of at the end of it, things go wrong,
Yeah.
and you get Walter basically just being uh, taken out by the Vespers, and you're captured. Everything's gone wrong. Classic final act low point before the finale, and
Hmm.
then you have a final mission of you beating people up in this or not a final mission, but the next mission is you beating people up in your junker AC, and it's very fun.
Yeah.
It's a fun little
And
twist
now
around.
you're yeah, and like by this point too, like if this is your first playthrough, you have like a 50% sadometer for Walter's like, oh man, that was my guy, and he didn't really seem all that bad, but now he's dead. I guess he got assassinated by these shady losers. That sucks. Okay. Um, damn. I guess I'm hanging out with Carla now, and Carla's fun, so I guess it's not that bad. But even she's like really sad because they were friends. Again, just like so much character from like random like
Yeah,
short cutscenes and stuff.
that's
Uh,
what I really liked about this part of the game. Is this is really where they lean into individual characters a lot more,
yeah,
and you
yeah,
get to see the strength of characters like Carla and Chatty, and Rusty comes back at a point. And this is
yeah.
also where you pick your ending. So your choices in the
Yes.
past 4 missions, aside from New Game Plus 2, don't matter. Outside of
Hmm.
like picking what you want, here is your final option of you and Carla go retake a mission you were in earlier and learn that this floating city in the water is actually a colony ship, and it has a super rad emerging from the water sequence that you get to watch.
Yep.
And then you decide to pilot a colony ship and ram it into a satellite, basically, and it's pretty rad.
It's so awesome.
I
And
do
part of this
think.
is
Go ahead, Brett.
we do just have we just have one of the best missions in the game
Yeah.
for this part when you're on the Xylem and you're going through some sort of choral excuse for you to have infinite energy so you can fly around forever. It doesn't
Yeah,
matter.
we'll get to that one in a minute because that's part of the ending route that we chose the first time.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but there is also a cool mission where you actually retake the Xylem, where you're like defending it from a bunch
Oh
of stuff coming
yeah, yeah.
in.
Well, it's
That's your
flying. It's
second
so pretty too.
stuff coming in. The fight off a bunch of snipers, and that one's very pretty. Uh,
Hmm.
yeah, really fun missions. I do think there should have been one more in Chapter 5. I get the sense that like there's a hard escalation from the Xylem mission to the end of the game. In the first
Yeah,
two routes at least.
yeah.
I wish there was one more mission that was like a lighter mission that's like, here's what's going on. To get another moment, but that's like a super minor thing. And the missions in the final chapter are all very fun and cool. So Brett and I both went with a particular choice here where you get the option of siding with Carla and Chatty, or siding with Air, who's been
Oh yeah.
your Coral co-pilot since Balteus, basically. Um, and you can basically Cinder, Carla, and Chatty Stick are trying to live up to Walter's original intention, which was to blow up the coral basically and prevent anyone from using it for any reason because it went all wrong last time, uh, and it needs to be eliminated basically. And there's a bunch of like notes you can find about Walter basically implying that this is what led to a bunch of the super dangerous augmentation surgeries that people went under the first
Yeah.
time, and that he wants to stop that from continuing to happen. So you get to make that choice where you either side with Carla or Air. We both sided with Carla our first time, and I would heavily recommend that this is the way most people play the game the first time because
It's yeah.
I think it hits the later stuff hits a lot harder after seeing this ending, um, which is the Fires of Raven. So let's talk about the Fires of Raven,
Yes.
Brett. We decide we're splitting off from Air and we're gonna help Carla and Chatty in a very awesome sequence of missions of everyone trying to stop you on the ship
Yes, you get to play defense while
with unlimited
I
energy.
think with unlimited energy while the entire remaining PCA force of all those same gunships flying at you at the same time. And infinite energy, of course, means that you can just fly
Yep.
and nothing is stopping you. And you can just like boost without ever running out of boost or whatever. Just all across this giant, it's just a skybox. There's
It is a
nothing
mission that
stopping
turned into
you.
Ace Combat, basically. This
It
is
literally
the
it
Ace
did.
Combat mission.
It just yeah, it turned into just like straight up just out of Gundam or something, flying through what looks like space and blowing up what look like capital ships with the the decision to give those ships such little health if you know where to aim might seem strange because they're such big enemies. Why would they die so fast? But it feels
It feels so
so good.
good.
If it just like going through like lines of like four of them in a row and like okay, well I'll aim my one cannon at the first one and then I'll fly up to the next one and hit it with the shotgun and then I'll go up to the one after that and then I'll hit it with the pile bunker and then by that time my cannon will have reloaded so I can hit the last one again in one like swoop and it feels so cool doing that. You have the iconic every game like this has to have it where Carla is play competing with you the whole time because she's in control of a big laser cannon. She's taking out ships on one side and you're taking out ships on the other side and she'll
Yeah, the
keep count or
classic
whatever. I don't
counting hits.
exactly. It makes it so satisfying and like the PCA is just like they go from we're going to make you stop, you annoying little boy, you're not supposed to be doing this, to oh my god, we're all dead, where what is happening, they're all like screaming at each other as their ships are all blowing up, their whole entire force is falling apart, and then you blow up the last ship and Carla calls you back but something happens,
Oh, Brett.
something absolutely
Brett, what
peak fiction
happens?
happens. Is you think you're just gonna go back to the ship, but Carla goes, "Oh no, something's wrong. We have another AC inbound. Who could it possibly be but your boy? He's not dead. Rusty's back." And he's got some absolutely cracked AC that just looks like something out of Gundam 00 because it's probably the same mechanical
Yep.
designer. This is the first time that Rusty's theme starts playing, Steel Haze, Rusted Pride, I think
Rusted
it's called on the
Pride.
soundtrack.
Yeah.
It's like, oh my god, it's one of the
So good.
yeah, straight up one of the
Especially
best
because you
songs
can
that
tell when
Kotohoshino's
that
done.
music starts in this mission, it is not your theme song, it's Rusty's.
No,
And
it's
you can tell
yeah, yeah.
you have become the villain in the scenario, and it is super
hmm
cool. Um,
It's it's
Loved
worth
it.
saying too that Armored Core didn't start like this, but 4 and 4 Answer really gave it this reputation of like, oh, well, just having random like vocal like experimental rock songs throughout the campaign is just part of AC. But they made the I think good decision to kind of keep it with classic Armored Core soundtracks for the most part until this happens, and then like because I was waiting for it the whole time where like I would hear just words drop and it's like now we have when the skies start speaking Latin, and now when they start speaking broken English at you, because whenever Kota Hoshino starts doing that, I don't need to understand what he's saying. I just know that it's amazing, and it's so cool.
Yeah,
Oh, and you
super
you
cool
fight
mission.
him, and in typical rival fashion, he's like,
And
no one
the
can fly
whole
higher than
unlimited
me.
energy thing is still active during this fight,
Yes,
too.
for him too. So, it's just
yeah.
dashing back and forth like crazy. It's
So
insane.
this is where the hypermobile fight feels really good, because no matter what your build is, you can keep up with it with the unlimited energy.
Exactly. And the Rusty is just going through the typical like rival staples of just like kind of putting you over, but also like calling you an asshole at the same time.
But he's going
And then
like,
you
is
kill
this
him.
the reason you were fighting and all that? Like, I told you to
Exactly,
seek out your
yeah.
reason for fighting, and this is what you chose.
Yep.
It's like
And you
unbelieving of it.
finally you kill him, and he goes, "No, I'm not done yet." And he comes back to life because he just gets more health and keeps fighting. Like the game does the slow-mo thing and everything. He's like, "Nope," and it speeds back up, and the fight keeps going, and it's so cool. And then you do end up beating him, and Air's like, "We shouldn't forget him," or whatever, because I think even Rusty was like at the beginning of the fight, he says something along the lines of like, "No matter what happens, even when you're like this, I'll never forget an opponent like you," or whatever.
Well, he also
and it's just
goes,
like,
the progression of the character in this fight is super good, because at the start he's like, I'll always remember you as a friend after this, but at the same time, you're not fighting for anything, so I'm going to end it. And by the end of it, he's realized that you are fighting for something, and he actually has like a line that's respecting that, and then before he dies, which is the super classic mech trope.
so
It makes your antagonist, because I don't want to say villain in the scenario, feel super familiar and really good. And this is just such a cool story moment. Like, this is where everything clicked together for me about what they were going for.
For
It was
sure.
great. And then you have the final mission, which is actually ramming this thing in, and you're hit by a laser, Brett. You're hit by a laser, and it turns out Air has defected and got an AC of her own.
Yeah, and she's tired of your shit. You're gonna kill all of me? No, that's
Yeah,
not
and it's
good.
important to know,
I
you
thought
already
we were
know
friends.
Carla and Chatty. Chatty died in the previous mission defending. You know
Yeah.
Carla's going to die because the ship has to be manually piloted to blow the thing up. So it's heavily implied that she's dead. I don't know if they ever actually confirm it, but it's super heavily implied. And then your only other friend, Air, is now your final boss of the mission. And she's hard. She's a hard final boss.
Not an easy fight at all.
It's
Properly
not
difficult.
super hard, but she, I think, was a really good level of difficulty that was like, this feels really intense, but very good as the final thing that I'm doing. Not to mention the fight just being super cool, of her basically realizing that what you're fighting for is essentially blowing up her species, which is, you know, not great, but at the same time, you're fighting for Walter's ideal of like preventing this from becoming an even bigger problem down the line. And yeah, super cool. I loved this theme here and the ending, and Air also gets her sort of not quite vocal, but sort of vocal theme music.
Yeah.
Nothing quite hits like Rusted Pride, but it was close.
No.
And
Nothing.
yeah,
Nothing
super cool
except for
ending.
one thing later, in my opinion. But
Yeah. Right. Anything else to say about this fight before we move on?
I just like how they just straight up like, hey, you if you still don't think this game is hard enough for you, what if we just ripped like 5 of Millennia's moves and just gave them to a giant robot instead?
Yeah, but
like,
this time you're in a giant robot and can get away fast enough.
It's just the same, like the 3 after images become before images and do sword strikes, and then the actual Air comes in.
Yeah,
for
it was
big
the hardest
sign.
part of this fight for me, was learning how to counter that, which you do learn. All right, and then you get this ending. You get the Fires of Raven ending, where you blew up the planet, ran away.
Yep, and act like you don't know nobody.
Yep. Which is, it's dark. It's a dark ending, but it's also, you did the mission. You accomplished what Walter wanted. And I think it's super cool as a first ending. I think if you played this ending second, you would probably like it a little bit less, because you're coming down from the high that is the Rubicon ending, which is what we're going to talk about next. So Rubicon ending, we're going to skip through most of it because there's very little difference here.
The New Game Plus doesn't alter really any of the missions.
Yeah, you can do missions in a different order
than,
sometimes.
Yeah.
You get a couple
New Game
alternate
Plus
missions.
is when things start to change.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So main differences here is you can opt in on New Game Plus to betray Balaam or not Balaam. Is it Balaam? Yeah, it is Balaam because you're fighting.
Yeah, it's
Guazu.
the red guns and
The
they're
red
under
guns. You can
Balaam.
betray
You
them in the
fight
first mission you get with them to fight
yeah.
and kill Volta and Iguazu. And we'll talk about Iguazu.
Professional
You
hater.
can trounce these two, and then move on, and you basically can do a lot more missions for the Rubicon Liberation Front, which I think is also why
Yeah.
it feels better to do the Rubicon ending second, because there's more missions that are related to the Rubicon Front that you end up doing. And so it feels a lot more thematic of like you actively chose to help them at every opportunity. Whereas in the other runs you can't choose that. So yeah, up until the end, most of it's the same. There's no big differences in the third and fourth chapters until you hit the choice with Air and Carla. Air gives you a mission to go hunt down Carla, and you basically play the mission that was defending the ship before in reverse of trying. Now you're going into the ship to actually hunt down Carla. It's super cool. And it feels bad because like the whole time you know what you're about to do is basically killing someone that had trusted you.
And now also you get like because the way that Chatty dies previously is the leader of Arquebus comes in and Chatty's just there at the wrong place at the wrong time. He can't stand up to the leader of Arquebus, so he dies, and Carla's really sad. But now you fight both Chatty and Carla at the same time, and they're like you get their reactions in real time of like either one,
and it's different based on which
first.
ones you get lower health thresholds.
Yeah, it's like crazy because they put a lot of effort into it clearly, and it definitely hits you. It does not
definitely
feel
hits
very
you.
good.
It is one of my least favorite fights in the game.
I don't blame you because you have to. You can choose to fight. I mean, it's basically the equivalent of 4 ACs in this mission because in that beginning area, if you choose to veer to the right, you can kick the shit out of Snail, which you should because he deserves it for his later actions.
And his prior actions. He's a dick the whole game, you know?
Yeah. And you can... There's one of the PCA AC equivalents that flies up at you in the room before the boss arena, and you kill him.
One of the HCs.
And then Chatty's in an AC, and Carla's in an AC at the same time. And then, after you kill them, you have to do some wacky thing that they just straight up lifted out of Last Raven to the point where I actually was very scared that I would have some sort of like trauma like attack or something, and I would just like lose control over my body because like when Chatty's like, oh, but I still have a way to defeat you or whatever after they're dead, and you go into the red room and you have to deactivate the things while the lasers are shooting at you. That is like almost 1-to-1 ripped out of the final bosses of Last Raven. And those missions are so ass-blastingly insane sometimes where I saw it at the end of this one and I was like, I'm not going to be able to do this. I'm actually at my limit. I cannot physically do this. And thankfully, it wasn't as bad. But it definitely took a lot of effort. It was not easy.
Yeah, super fun, though. I do overall love this mission. As much as avoiding the soup is a pain in the...
I know, yeah. When the soup is used against you, you really start to realize how powerful it is.
Yep. And for the soup is the missile launchers that Carla uses. The huge amount. And they are literally called soup.
Yes.
They're very good and very painful when they're used against you. Yeah, super cool mission and has a lot of weight to it. And then your next mission, the best mission in the game, Brett, is you start up, Air goes, I sent out your call. I used your name because you've gathered a bunch of allies over the course of this and sent your name out and told them the Raven's flying to save Rubicon, basically. And then you get a cut of the entire planet basically erupting in warfare as the Liberation Front is fighting all the corps. And then Rusty flies over, and Air goes, he was the first to answer the call. And his music kicks in, and now it's for both of you, and it's incredible, Brett.
It's so based because this time too, it's revealed, because when your first playthrough, it's like, okay, well, the corporations are doing something silly. They must have been the ones that sent Rusty after you. It's actually the Rubicon Liberation Front that sends Rusty after you the first time he comes after you, but you have no real reason to believe that yet. But now, by this point, he's like said different things up until this point in this run of the story, and now it's very clear he was with the RLF the whole time. He was in Arquebus as a funny little haha. And now he's like, okay, well you're on my side now, so let's go through. We're gonna blow up all these things inside of the Xylem to stop it from hitting the big coral no. And his theme is blasting the whole time, and
It's
you and him
incredible.
just
It's so good.
it's so sick. You move through and you're just blowing up all these objectives. You fight another smart cleaner, which people are like, reuse boss it, but you just cream it with Rusty.
Yeah, the
and
reason
it
it's
feels
reused
so
is so
good.
you could absolutely destroy it with no thought. And it's
Exactly.
great.
Yeah. I like the first smart cleaner fight is like because I mostly just got very frustrated with the fact that the collision damage is still there on the arms even when it's stunned, but it doesn't matter here because Rusty is a bro
Mm-hmm.
and he's shooting at it while you're shooting at it, and so it stuns a lot easier and everything. Um, and this is not a short mission because there's more objectives after that. And then Ryan, you said this is the best mission in the game, and I would agree with you, except for the fact that it has the worst boss fight at the end
It
of
does.
it. It's
So,
terrible.
I will still say it's the best mission in the game solely because of the music and the Rusty moment. I think
absolutely.
it overrides any negativity, which there is a lot about
Yes.
goddamn V2 Snail and Arquebus Balteus.
This should have been its own mission purely so that it did not have to spit on the masterpiece that came before it. But it's
absolutely.
The same mission.
This was, for me, like I didn't spend as much time on this boss fight as I did on Ibis or Balteus, but I hated every second of it more. This is the one that broke me. This is the fight that broke me into using the double stun needle launchers, because he's got all of the bullshit of the first Balteus, of like the pulse armor. He doesn't do the missile thing, but he has even more annoying attacks to make up for it.
Mm-hmm.
This fight is just it's a battle of attrition that is so weighted against you, it feels like, that it is incredibly hard to push through in your first try. And I'll note, I played this mission again, trounced it in one try. So I do think it is a case of this boss is a lot easier to fight after you fought it for hours.
After like going to bed and coming back a couple of days after.
I think a lot of it is just as like, there's, I think in particular, two attacks that are problems here. I think a lot of this fight is fine, but the laser launcher thing that he does whenever he's moving is just so unpredictable as to when it's going to hit you. And it feels like if you get hit by one, you will get hit by the other. Like, you can't dodge the second one in a row, and then you're dead. Or you're at like 0% health and have to use your thing and barely survive, and then you're going to get hit by another volley of things. And that single laser attack is my most hated attack in this game. Like, the basic
straight up
laser 2-hit combo that he does is so horrendous, because you can get away and that you can just be far back, but he does the attack mixed in with all of his other moves, so you never know when he's going to pull it out. So you can't guarantee that you'll be far away. And he also just like does wacky zoom things where even if you're on him, he like moves behind you and then does it or something. It's just it is incredibly frustrating.
Because it doesn't have like, it's all going off of timing. There's no visual cue at like it probably takes the same amount of time to charge every time, but all you get is like, okay, the ball
this is actually
there.
This is my other problem with Balteus that I didn't mention when we were talking about Balteus, is when Balteus does the assault armor, the voice line warning you about the assault armor plays after it goes off.
It starts,
which is so frustrating, because that is what killed me on many of my Balteus runs, was like that attack going off and me just not realizing that I'd hit the health threshold for it to happen in the like flurry that I was doing, and then Ari would start her line and be like, oh well, I can't get out of it now because it's during the line. And the same thing happens in Arquebus Balteus, of like, you just don't really have an indication of that attack going off until you're too close for it to be able to be escapable. So
I had, because I'm not going to say I did not have trouble with that with Balteus normally, because I definitely did, but I got to a point where I like could see like where it was going to happen, so I'd be like, okay, this stupid line comes up too late, so I now have to over adjust myself and
I have to like
now
keep track of the
away
health bar and see when I hit 50%.
for Arquebus Balteus, like I was so like you have to pull out all the
You
stops
have to
to
be so
even get him
focused on what you're
to
doing that looking at the health bar is death.
it's
Like,
it's yeah, you can't like even stop for a second. Like the and that's the thing. Like there, I still see for all the bosses in this game. There's those crazy videos where it's like some guy beating it with no weapons and just punching and kicking or whatever, and that's awesome. But the equivalent for that, the only one that I've seen for Arquebus Belteus is the guy literally has to keep it stunned and staggered the whole time because the second it were to do something, you
yeah.
wouldn't be able to keep up with it anymore because it's like it's insane. So that video is like 15 seconds of the guy just running up and then like pile bunkering into a lance into something else and the pile bunker recharges and just kills it. And I wish I was that much of a hard ass to do that, but I'm not. I'm a normal person.
I have normal
And this is
human
my
reaction time.
exactly. And I don't have the desire to build craft to that extent where I'm just going to like I still I go into boss fights with the desire to experience the boss fight and not to just obliterate them. Like the point of a boss fight shouldn't be to, well, you better kill them before the boss fight starts, otherwise you're not going to be able to win. That's like terrible, but that's what it feels like on a first attempt, especially. I like I this was so infuriating for me, and I this is probably my least favorite boss in the game. It's not the one I had the most trouble with, but it's like it
The
doesn't
one
have
that's
any
most
right
frustrating
being.
to deal with.
It's yeah, it doesn't have
Especially
any
because it's at a
right being
gauntlet
this
of like
difficult.
this mission has so many other encounters in it that by
I
the time you get to it, you're just
know.
exhausted. And like
Yeah,
I think it's more frustrating for this fight because you know that if you quit the mission, you're gonna have to
exactly.
redo the whole thing. And it's a fun mission, but it is like just exhausting by the end of it. And yeah, I agree that this is like the fight that I had the most problems with by the end of it.
Yeah.
And like I've seen people online being more okay with this, and I think this is a case of like this boss fight is just hard in particular ways that are going to be harder for certain people. Um,
Yeah.
and especially like the big sword swing thing he does in the second phase, I think threw me for a loop for a while, but then it's relatively easy to get around it once you know what it is. But
Mhm.
there's just a lot of little things like that, and especially the luck part of this fight of like if he pulls out the
Definitely.
double laser at a bad time, you're just dead. If he
It's
pulls
yeah.
out the sword swing at a weird angle, you're dead. Like where
You're
you
dead.
can't
Yeah,
react to
because
it.
again, because the stagger in this game affects you so horribly because it's a mechanic
Yeah.
now and not just like poise or whatever. Uh, the age old FromSoft blunder because it's never fun in any of the games that they do this, where you just get hit by the first hit of a 12 hit combo and okay, well now you're punished into being hit by everyone after that is now so much worse because now there's a damage penalty beyond just like the normal damage you would take because when you're staggered you take like flat damage, no defense taking any
Yeah.
numbers off of that. So if you get stunned, if you get staggered by the laser thing or his pulse blast that he does, or the sword, and you're open to all the things that come after without really being able to do anything about it. And it's very annoying. This and my other least favorite boss both do that very often, and it made me wish that FromSoft would stop pretending that people would forgive them for doing that because it's never fun in any of their games. The stupid combos that like I literally the only game they work in is Bloodborne because you can whip out the thing to parry them at like any time. But every other like they do it in Dark Souls 3, they
Yeah,
do
it
it in
just
this,
sucks.
they've done it in Sekiro. It's like it's so
And I
annoying
think
to me.
here it
I
feels
hate it.
particularly bad just because I think it combos onto having repair kits now, where it wouldn't feel
Yeah,
quite as
yeah.
bad if instead of repair kits you just had that amount of health total,
Yep.
because now it's a lot more possible to get one shot in Armored Core than it was before, and I think that generally just isn't fun for the Armored Core
No,
style of
yeah.
game. Um, and yeah, it feels really bad, especially in this fight, because there's so much that does tons of stagger damage. There's so much chip damage. There's so much like stuff just flying on the screen. There are moments in this fight where you will not be able to tell what's going on because there's too many
No,
particle
straight
effects
up.
everywhere. Of there just being a soup of things on the screen. Of you're seeing pulse shots, you're seeing this gigantic purple laser that leaves gunk everywhere, so you can't see what's going on, and like it's just not. I think it is thematically a super cool fight, but I do wish
Yeah,
they had just
thematically it's
tuned
cool.
some of the attacks here to be not as obnoxious as
Yeah.
they are.
And
It's not even the
I
last
just
fight of
would
this
have
run.
liked. No, it's not. And it has no right being this difficult because it's not even the final boss of this run. And they have the gall too to like either in the middle of it or like right at the very end. There's not even a cutscene. Rusty just gets killed off screen.
Hey, you know what,
It's like
Brett? I'm gonna choose to believe that line went silent. His AC was destroyed for sure. He could have ejected. You know, it
but
could have been
he's
totally fine.
good. Okay.
Until
But that's
until someone tells me he
uh,
definitively died, I'm not buying it. We didn't see a
that's the
body.
thing though. I would have at least appreciated even definitive or not whatever. I would have at least appreciated some kind of like cool cutscene, tragic because he's dying as a reward. I didn't even realize who did it at first because they just say it and it's just like, oh, some unknown thing killed him. The next guy you fight killed him. It's Walter. But for like until someone told me like way after I'd finished that run, I didn't even put two and two together because it just happens off screen. It would be at
No, I
least
didn't
cool
realize.
if
I
like he
wish
was
we got
flying
like a
in.
cutscene of Rusty flying in
Yeah.
and then getting either blasted or maybe we after the fact, maybe an end credit scene of Rusty chilling on a beach somewhere. You know,
I would love
that would be a
that.
good alternative.
I would love
Um,
like the end of Halo Reach where it shows your helmet like all wrecked. It shows his like the head of the steel haze Ortis or whatever, and like the cockpit's open or something.
yeah, yeah,
That's all
just
I
like
need.
something that's a little that implies
Yeah.
something cool. And yeah, I think the Walter fight super fun thematically.
Yeah.
It's not super challenging, and I don't think it needed to be. I think this is Snail was your big challenge for this run, so now you get to kind of relax
Mhm.
as you murder your old boss. And the Walter stuff is super cool because he's been all coral doped up by the corporations and can't
Yeah, he
tell
got
if he's
like
fighting for
brainwashed.
himself or if he's fighting for the corp. And at the end,
Hmm.
he like realizes what's going on and has like a moment of lucidity where he chooses not to shoot you and like puts it down and is like, "You found a
Yeah.
friend," talking about air, and it's I think the happiest ending that Walter can get because
Yeah, it's super sad. Like, oh my
it's
god.
super
If I
sad.
That's the main horrible thing about why the Arquebus Beltaeus fight is so bad is because like I was coming down off the afterglow of being supremely pissed off for like 2 or 3 hours, and I had to like I couldn't immediately be emotionally
Yeah,
effective like the cutscene wanted me to be. I was too busy being mad because I was. And so it took me like after the fact, like thinking about it, be like, man, that like sucks, dude. In a good way, that sucks. But like, oh man, they got me, and I couldn't even realize it in the moment because I was too busy being like that last fight was terrible. I'm just pissed. I'm all heated now, but I don't want to stop because this is the last mission of the
yeah.
game, right? So,
And this is
but yeah,
also
he's so much
weirdly the
easier.
only final boss AC that you fight that you get their pieces. Because you get all the
Yes,
HAL pieces, you
yeah,
don't get the other ones. You didn't get Air's
hmm
pieces from before, which is I wish we got them because they look very cool, even if they're tuned down to
yeah.
not be as busted. Uh,
I wish.
yeah, really cool fight thematically. I think this ending is pretty unequivocally the good ending of the game. Like if you want
Yeah,
to label them at all, I don't think this is a game that has necessarily like a good, true, whatever ending, as like a lot of people
yeah,
state. It's got three different endings that all have three different things. But this one is unlike equivocally, I think, the most hopeful of all of them. As like, there's not a lot of
yeah.
unknowns, and everyone seems to be really happy with how things left off,
And it
if they're
seems like
alive.
Rubicon's like, yeah, if anyone's alive, it seems like if Rubicons or Rubiconians are still chilling, that they'd be more united now, that sort of thing.
Yeah, you got Raven
Uh,
defending Rubicon basically
it's yeah,
from now on. So,
um,
and Raven unequivocally survives this one. Like this is one of the ones where
yes,
Raven gets out
it
very
shows you
cleanly.
escaping, I think, right?
Yeah. So yeah, a really cool second run. I think this hit harder playing it second and seeing
Yeah,
Rusty's theme hit so hard on that second hit because I was like,
absolutely.
oh, is he gonna fight me again in this route? Because I'd been spoiled to the fact that Rusty shows up as a thing in both routes or is like off screened in both routes basically. And
Hmm.
in this one, I had been expecting that you were gonna fight him again. Like, I thought, oh, he'd have a different reason to fight you at the end of, like, he's fighting for the corporation, and then realizing that he's not and is there to be your ally for this mission was super cool. Like, it hits so hard. And yeah, I think we just kind of stumbled into a really good order to play this game in.
Yeah, seriously.
All right, let's talk about New Game Plus 3, or New Game Plus 2, because
Yes.
this is an interesting one. Largely the same until you unlock 3 new arena fights that you get to do.
3 new arena fights.
Which are against ACs that are weirder. You got a couple wacky ones, and then you got Steel Haze Ortis being one of them. Of like, you learn about Steel Haze Ortis at the start of the game now. And Ares got lines about all of these, and like mentions how weird it is that you're finding these ACs data in Allmind, and like what is she, or Allmind is an AI using it for. And it's cool. It's a cool kind of thread to follow until you actually start communicating with Allmind.
Yeah. You get, so there's one mission where for the first 2 playthroughs it's something happened, everybody in this place went silent. What happened? And you go there and it's actually just a bunch of invisible robots that are unaffiliated seemingly with anybody, that just like you have to scan for them and do that before you can reliably lock onto them. Otherwise, they'll keep shooting at you from their invisibleness. But in this playthrough, that mission is taken up by some lady you've never heard of before. Just wants you to show up here because something's happening. I don't know. And then you just do that mission in reverse, basically, and then you fight a cataphract and some friends with, your good old friend Kate, who's definitely been here the whole time. Notably, at the start of the game,
you fight the cataphract,
yes.
Which is very fun.
Yeah, it's by this point they're like, okay, you have at least fought it once, and
you also have
like
another person there, like the Rusty fight, distracting, so it's not as hard, but fun fight.
But yeah, it's Kate doesn't sound like Allmind without the robot filter at all.
Of course not.
And yeah, and
totally isn't using the Mind Alpha or Mind Gamma set that you can see in the arena tab.
You start to piece together like, all these times these invisible robots showed up or whatever in previous runs, like, there seems to be something. Yeah, there seems to be something attached to Allmind here. And just there's one of the Chapter 2 missions before the Sea Spider fight is you have to stop a bunch of things from hacking into Carla's system by blowing them up. And then you do that, and then, who's gonna come after you but good old Iguazu? He's pissed that you're better than him because he's a salty little red gun boy. And it seems like he's just like in the same shoes as you, as like he's also a new guy, but you're just doing a better job at making a name for yourself than he is because he kind of sucks.
Well, it's also so Iguazu was a Vesper who then betrayed the Vespers and jumped ship to Balaam.
to Balaam, which is backwards. It's weird because the red guns like suck. They're like funny. They're not really competent at all.
Except for Michigan,
like opposed to
competent.
Yeah, except for Michigan. But like you compare that to Arquebus, where they're all like super like prim and proper. They have all these very like specific like. It just feels like they're a lot more based in fancy plans and like being like well kept, and like the red guns are just like, we're just gonna get in there and blow stuff up. We're gonna go on another field trip, kids. But yeah, he shows up at the end of that mission. He's like, I'm tired of you being cool. I'm gonna freaking kill you now. And then the funny invisible robots show up in the middle of your fight with him, and he's like, I'm gonna kill these things first. What are you doing? Shoot at them, not me. And then, as you know, they're very obviously Allmind affiliated now. And later on in this run, you start getting offered more missions by Allmind. One of them being it's the Ibis mission, except Allmind gives it to you this time, and they're like, there's that thing over there, but we just wanted to let you know that somebody's planning to shoot you with the anti-worm gun after you done kill him. So
go kill him first.
You should go kill that guy first. Yeah, and so you can, and you just go through the same sewer pipes that you go through with the Junker AC, but backwards because you're going into them this time. And you go through, and V2 Snail's chilling in his little sewer hole. And you go in and you start kicking the crap out of him, and Iguazu shows up again to try to kill you, and it still
And you
doesn't
still
work.
trounce him because he's a
You
little
still
terrible
obliterate
boy.
him. And this whole time, Air's like, I don't really like. I know there are already voices in your head, but these guys are weird.
That all of Allmind's missions are a little bit sinister. Like, I don't think there was ever
none of them
a
are
question
nice.
as to what this run was going to end in terms of what's going on. But Allmind, and I think I remember very early on, Brett, talking to you about, like, this seems weird. Allmind's a little sinister. Like, in, like, playthrough 1. And I'm glad I was right.
Because they have that, like... It's another testament to the writing and acting, I think, where they do have that, like, just a twinge of that, like, weird, evil, like, HAL 9000 energy to them.
Yeah.
And it's like, is this gonna happen? I don't know. There's... Nah,
especially the mission where they're
not.
like, we'll finalize our partnership and you'll be safe and we'll keep you safe.
Yes, exactly.
Which is, I think, the coolest mission in this run.
Absolutely.
Of going through and you see Allmind, like, turn on all of the mercs and MTs and, like, the sheer terror as you're going through and, like, everything's blowing up but you're safe and everyone else is basically screaming.
Before that, though, I forget what the guy's name is, but he's a member of, I think it's Arquebus, that he's not in any of the other missions. He's only in one of them, and Allmind's like, hey, there's a guy that used to be with us, but he is deciding to go against our plans. So please blow him up. And you go to do it, and it's just you and the AC that Allmind wants you to kill, and he's like, who the hell are you? Like, you're so satisfied just getting up and drinking your coffee every day, you loser. Like, why don't you want anything interesting to happen? If you do this, you're gonna screw up everything, you asshole. And it's like, I wasn't expecting like a weird Germa line to come from a serious, like, armored core enemy that was gonna make me, like, think about my life a little bit.
Especially because you don't know the deal at that point. Like,
exactly,
this is really a route where you don't know what's going on until the end. Which is cool, but I think it is part of the thing that makes this route feel a little bit different from the others. And
absolutely,
this one to me felt the least like a part of the story that I had actively chose. I think this is once you make your first couple of decisions, it's more, if you're continuing to hit the Allmind button, it's out of morbid curiosity because
exactly, like,
you know it's gonna go bad.
Nothing good's gonna happen. Exactly, it's like, listen, I did the other two endings already.
We had a good one. We had a bad one. What's this one gonna be?
It's but yeah, then that mission that you were talking about just before is also, like, just atmosphere wise, it's one of my favorites too, because you literally have, like, MT pilots being like, this is hell. We're in hell right now, and it's like, like, everything is on fire. Just the whole entire, like, tunnel is exploding. You can go off to the side in this mission to find the secret last remaining red gun just in a burning corner, and you can save him from a bunch of PCA guys, and then he goes, I'm sorry, 621, but I can't trust you anymore. And he sounds like he's gonna cry when he's saying it, and he turns on you too, and you have, like, an impromptu AC fight and just, like, some burning cabinet off to the side. Just it's like, by this point it's like, well, I mean, there's nobody alive to tell me no anymore, so I guess I'll just keep going, even though I know it's bad.
At this point, you gotta stick with it. So you get that cool mission, and then you see Allmind stuck you in a freezer box and woke you up later, and basically did the rest of the game while you were asleep, and then pops you up for this final mission, during which you're probably super confused and have to go do a bunch of taking control of the Xylem stuff in reverse again. And it's a really fun sequence of missions, but this one hits different to me than the others.
It does, yeah.
And then the ending of this one, unless there's something else we want to mention about that final Xylem retaking thing. Nothing crazy in that one.
There's a lot of hidden parts to find.
A lot of hidden bits and lots of weird attacks from within the ship and all that. There is the funky bit where she goes, you hear, like, Walter and Carla reacting from outside.
Oh, yeah.
As to what's going on, and then hear that she's, like, All Might has copied the Vespers over into AIs, basically.
Yeah.
And they're both fighting copies of the Vespers, and it's wacky. And then you hear Walter going like, "Oh, 621 made his choice in that AC, and like they're the ones that chose this." I'm like, you know,
doesn't feel so good at all.
Don't
actually,
feel like I did really. And then that continues until the final fight, which is All Mind, of course, doing the AI thing and turning on you, and then who else but Iguazu?
For one last time, again, professional hater. Nobody
gave himself
is more
up
of a
to
hater.
become part of whatever conglomerate being All Mind is.
Yeah,
just to hate on you more.
Exactly. The best part about this, because at first I was like, I mean, I didn't really care about Iguazu at all. Why is he the final boss? Exactly.
That's because I fought him 4 times and I forgot about him after every single fight.
Exactly. You aren't supposed to give a single shit about this character at all, and then he's the last guy who's like, I hate you so much that I basically I just helped you doom everyone so that I could be better than you, and now I'm going to kill you. And for like 3 hours, he did. I hate this fight so much.
Really?
This is my second least favorite fight in this game. This
Brett, you're
pissed
gonna
me
hate
off.
this.
I know you did it in your first try. I don't care. I'll take the filtercopter in my first try. You can have Almighty Iguazu on your first try. This is the trade-off that we have.
And I don't even think I was using a busted build. I was using, I think, the redshift and then some missiles and a laser handgun.
Yeah, I was not happy during this fight. I don't know if this was my
You do get Air
day.
as a bonus companion in this one. She gets her AC and then comes with you.
And worth pointing out too, this is, I did like just go back to, I want to do the S ranks on the missions I thought would be most annoying first to get them over with, and I did. Like, it took me a couple tries with the same the buffed assault rifles that I killed Ibis with. The same thing. It just took me a couple tries with it, and a lot less annoying when I'm not like on the same boss for like I think like multiple nights in a row.
Sometimes you need the reset. You gotta do the hard reset.
Exactly. And I will say, at least there's no like 20-minute mission before this.
Yeah.
That you have to do every single time you want to like try again after saving or whatever. But yeah,
this is
the fight. It's 3 phases. You start with something that is very easily super annoying if you're not ready for it. There's just like 10 AC copies, and then one of them is Iguazu in the middle, and he's got the beefed up Karasawa rifle and a shield and everything. If you hardlock on him, it doesn't break, so it's really easy to keep track of which one's which. And I found using the pulse armor just like takes care of most of the ACs if they're like trying to be assholes like 3 inches away from you in a circle or whatever. So there's that, and then you kill him, and All Mind's like, Iguazu, you're being Iguazu again. You're not supposed to use this, by the way. And Iguazu's like, fine, I guess. We'll do the next one then. And then he gets a beefier AC, 2 sea spiders, which definitely do not have as much health as the regular sea spider. They have like less than half, threatening. Thankfully. Yeah. When they just mostly play support, and you can kind of ignore them for the most part. But then Air is also like, well, I have an idea too, and she comes in with it's not the AC she used as a final boss.
It's one that it was the final arena fight, as you learned of the Coral AC that existed.
Exactly, and she's like, well, it's Coral, so I could probably control this, and then she does.
This is the one I really wish we got the parts for. I don't know if maybe it is made of existing parts, but I don't think it is.
Well, which one, Airs or
Airs?
Yes,
and Mind Gamma. I think the Mind Gamma suit is really cool, and I would love to get that one. But
Mind Gamma, you get, I think, like the head and body for. I don't know if you get the rest for. And Airs, you do.
What I really want, Brett. So this is the one thing that disappointed me in this game is true swarm missiles. I am a big proponent in everything of swarm missiles. The best, aside from the pile bunker is very cool, and this is why Armored Core 6 gets a pass on not having true swarm missiles. the light wave launcher is kind of like it, but it sucks, so they don't count. Um, the truest swarm missiles is the one where it's shoulder pads that open up and then blast just an ungodly number of missiles at you.
Yeah,
And
yeah, yeah.
multiple PCA ACs and I believe Iguazu in this fight have the
I
true
think
swarm
so,
missile
something like
pods that pop open and then launch just an amount of missiles that are small and micro,
that.
but
Yeah,
just a little extreme. And they do the thing where they all spin out and have like the big curvy trails at once and all go in different directions and then close in.
yeah,
That's the
yeah,
look that I want, Brett. I want that particular swarm missile, and we don't get it. We don't get that one, and I wish we
yeah.
did.
I wish. Listen, DLC add-on pack, please. I will buy it. I will
Yeah,
buy it
please
so
do.
hard. Um, uh, but I think his are like they're like plasma missiles or something, but they
Yeah,
do
yeah.
that. But yeah, and then the reason that I really don't like this fight is that it does the same thing we were talking about Arquebus Balteus doing, but more often, where in the last phase where All Mine keeps being like Iguazu, you actually kind of suck a little bit. You need to do your job better. Iguazu's like, shut up, get out of my head. He pulls the Miro on the most recent
Yeah.
AW pay per view, and everybody else shuts up. Airs, AC goes down, and All Mine stops talking, and it's just you and Iguazu. Um, he starts pulling out a bunch of melee attacks. They're just really annoying. Like I could dodge Air's melee attacks pretty reliably after a while because I just put on fast enough legs and I just kept like boosting out of the way because you just learn at the right time. But there's something about how close Iguazu comes and how long the blades are where I just could not. I still can't dodge them at all. I have to like make sure that I'm in like perfect positioning where he just can't hit all of
I
them.
think I used pulse
Uh,
armor for this fight and used it on that. Because I think
that
what
would
I did
make
is
sense.
I
Yeah, that
pulse
probably helped
armored
a
and then
lot.
charged my Moonlight while he was doing his combo,
Hmm,
and then busted him out of it by stun locking him afterwards.
that makes
Um,
sense. Yeah.
and I know you can dodge it because I definitely did dodge it once by dodging like underneath him and around, but that relies on you being at the
Yeah.
right position at the start of the combo.
Yeah, I have yet to. Someday, I'm sure I will figure it out, or maybe not because I already S ranked it and I have no excuse to play that mission again if I don't want to. But yeah, I don't know. At least for I was definitely tilted because it took me forever, and I definitely got angrier and angrier. But I just did not enjoy this fight whatsoever. What happens after though? Because obviously you best
Coral
him.
release.
Horror release. So, listen, it happens. I don't care if you don't like Evangelion. I don't care if you don't like the 90 other things that this happens in. This is a mecha trope, and people turning into red and becoming one is going to happen no matter what. I'm sorry, deal with it. And it's handled I pretty well here. Because
This is a
like
more hopeful than a lot of the other interpretations of it, like
yeah.
Evangelion. Like this one, I think you're unequivocally alive.
Yes, it's there's still so many questions too, which is still satisfying that they made something so ambiguous.
Because my
Because
guess at what actually happened is it's you released the Rubiconians that were turned into Coral at whatever point, and then all of them took up
yeah,
in the ACs that were made with Coral parts, so they could be
mhm.
living ACs basically, like 621 functionally is, and then
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
what it
Because
seems like
air,
happened. But then it's also like it dispersed you, turned into a black hole, and put you out in different parts of the galaxy.
just yeah, different. Yeah, because the whole like you just wake up in the again just the end of episode 26 of Evangelion, where everybody goes congratulations in the middle of the ocean,
Yep.
just the same place,
Just like
but like the whole
a like shallow ocean of water that is about up
yeah,
to
it's
your
really
like AC's
pretty.
foot. Super pretty.
Um, but yeah, you just like wake up with a bunch of other ACs and the sky is like pulsing with red veins and stars because all other coral things are happening in other galaxies in the universe and stuff.
Yep.
Um,
And hey, Rusty's
and
probably
air,
alive in this route. You
Rusty,
know.
he is probably there somewhere. And it's I've heard because I'm not gonna. This is I feel towards this the same way that I felt towards the majority of Signalis, where it's just like I'm getting the vibes. I don't need to know exactly what's happening here.
Yeah.
I get the vibes. I whatever happens next, whatever ending they decide to be canon or not, whether this gets explained, I'm understanding it to a degree where I enjoy it, so I'm fine. I
Yeah.
don't need the hyper specifics, but a lot of discourse I've seen has been around Air saying activate combat mode at the very end, and one that's because I think in this game, no matter what, it's always the male AC voice computer that says activating combat mode, whatever. In the older games, it used to be whatever headpiece you had changed the voice that your AC would have. And in the originals, it was a female voice, and it sounds a lot like Air's. So her saying that is a reference to that. And it's
I will
also
say, I don't think
like,
I've ever had as intense of a reaction to a single line as Air saying
yeah.
activate combat mode.
Because it's cool, and it's also I've heard some people be like, oh well, that just means the scourge of humanity is continuing, and all those ACs that just woke up are immediately fighting each other to the death. And it's
I
like,
took
well,
it as a like joke about a buddy being like, I'm now your onboard ship computer or whatever, and not.
okay, well that's that's actually, I really like that. I did not think of it like that,
I took it
but I
as just
actually
Air
really
being
like
like,
that.
hey, we survived. I'm just gonna do the thing we do at every start of every mission now.
Well, yeah, because I did take it kind of like that, where it's like now your new mission is to do whatever you want and make your own choices with no
Yeah.
mission selector or corporations. And
Brett,
there's no
here's where we
like,
get open world armored core. This one.
shut up. uh, yeah, I don't know. It maybe it could work, but I don't think so. I don't know. I'm fine with the missions. This game proved to me the missions can still be good.
The value of missions.
The value of missions. Not every game has to be open world. Please no. um, but yeah, I don't know. I mean that's the end of the story as we know it. The three ends of the story. I think,
Yeah.
like you said before, I don't think there's a true ending. I think people like to call the New Game Plus Plus one the true ending, but it's
Yeah,
just
I
as
think it's
true
fair
as
to
the
call the New Game
others.
Plus one the secret ending because it is actually like you have
Yeah.
to play through both of the other ones to get it. But I
Yeah.
get the sense this is not a game that's going to make a judgment on which ending is the right one because all of them
No.
are good and bad in their own ways.
Hmm.
Um,
And they're all like separate. Like one can't happen while the other happens. They're all separate in their canon. But in order to understand the game, it's like Nier. You need to play all of
yeah.
them to have like a fully rounded understanding of
And so
the
I have a
full canon of the
DLC
game.
pitch for you, Brett. This is, I think, what I
Okay.
would want to see as DLC is a fourth route that is
Hmm.
basically the All Mind route, but as if you were aware of All Mind's like ill intention for your allies.
Oh.
I want to see a you gathering all of your buds to do to go against basically All Mind when they turn in that mission where everything goes to shit, basically.
I would love that.
I want that, but you're with your allies. Snail can eat shit. Snail can be in the dirt.
Snail can
Iguazu.
die.
Maybe Iguazu can get a redemption arc. You know, let's go wild with it.
Yeah.
Let's
I
let
think
Iguazu
so.
get
I
a
think he
redemption.
deserves it.
Rusty unequivocally survives this route and is just your buddy. Like, give us the
Necessary.
proper Persona Royal, like, true ending.
Yeah, yeah.
That's the DLC I want, is the one that's like, hey, you played all the other routes, you lived with the bad things that happened. We're just gonna give you some candy. You know, we're gonna let you see the best route last, and I think that would be very fun.
Sprinkle in some new AC parts, and by some I
Yeah.
mean a lot.
Yeah, give me
Not
proper
because
swarm
there's
missiles.
Yeah, we need the proper swarm missiles. We need sniper rifles. There's only 2 quad legs in the game. We need
There's
more
three.
of those. There's 3.
Yeah,
There's
you get the
there's the
lightweight, you get
beefy.
the heavyweight, and then you get like a midweight at one point.
I thought there was only 2, because I know
Maybe there is
there's
only two. Am I
I think
missing
there's
one?
because it's absurd because you go back to the older ones and there's like 10. So 2 or 3, there's not enough. Even like build variety, whatever. Okay, like I get it. You don't want a million of the same thing, but also if you want to recreate something, it helps to have more things that look a little bit like the thing you want to remake. 'Cause it's very clearly like
Well,
they
there are only
have.
two. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, it's crazy. And there's only like 4 tank treads, 3 or 4, right? And one of
Yeah,
them's a
there's 3.
hovering thing. Yeah.
But you get the boat at the end. That hovers.
The boat, yeah. But yeah, I like they could add more of those. There's enough heads in the game, but there need to be more heads that look like other things so that you can cosplay easier. Uh, I know 4 and 4 Answer had I forget what they're called, but they're just like separate little parts that you can add on like aside from armor.
That's what I
and it
want.
was
I
like
want the Gundam Breaker
yeah,
3 like bits that you can just put on that give you like a weird one-off
exactly.
thing you can use during the mission.
Even if they don't, maybe I just want to put a unicorn horn on
Maybe I
things.
want a
Maybe I want to
V-fin.
make the shoulders
Maybe I
a
want a
little bit.
V-fin on my
Exactly.
mecha.
Exactly.
Yeah, I think they could do a lot with customization. So we've seen people like making the Zaku eye out of sticker and whatnot, and
That's what I
that
do.
kind of thing. I would love to see a couple of like extra pieces that are just more customization.
I'd like that, yeah.
I hope they do DLC. I think this game is actually a good game to do some, but I also don't.
Mhm.
FromSoft is unpredictable as to whether or not they're actually going to do that. So
Yeah.
it's hard to say. They've done it for
Someone-
most of the recent games, but Elden Ring's DLC hasn't even come out yet. So
I know, yeah. It'll probably be after that if it happens, like without
Yeah.
a doubt.
because I'd imagine the Elden Ring DLC seems like it's going to be pretty chunky because it's been a
It
couple
better
of
be,
years.
yeah, at this point.
But yeah, I mean, overall, excellent game. I think definitely the best mech game that I've played start to finish. As much as I love Gundam Breaker 3, Gundam Breaker 3 is a pretty. The story is pretty nonsensical, and, you know,
Yeah.
it's really just a game about making cool mechs and not anything else. And it's unbeaten at that, but I think Armored Core 6 is probably the best overall package, and man, does it feel good. That's the real thing. Is it just feels so good to play.
Yeah, the moment-to-moment gameplay is like fantastic. There's like just like with Final Fantasy 16, I've seen like veterans of the franchise saying that this is not an Armored Core game, and it's like, stop lying. This is like very obvious. Like it's so Armored Core down to the core. Like they've just made it feel new while still retaining all like that same feeling of the older games. And just that moment-to-moment gameplay is so good before things start falling apart with certain fights, certain weapons, and certain like just buttons not going through and stuff. But I like again like all the things that I dislike about the game are things that can be fixed and seem like they're going to be fixed via patches, which is not like this isn't like this game does not work.
We're no longer in the
now...
era of Dark Souls 1 PC version not working and
wacky
wacky workarounds and just being impossible to play. Like
this game isn't a like 6 out of 10 with potential to be a 10 after patches that'll come in 3 years. This game, for me, it's like it's a solid 9 with like potential for it to be one of my favorite games of all time, as long as they fix the slight things that are wrong with it.
Yeah, I'd agree. I think I'd maybe put it like an 8 right now, just because the stagger stuff annoys me enough to be an issue. But at the same time, like it's one of the games. I am hard pressed to finish a game 3 times within 3 weeks in most situations, and I managed to do it for Armored Core 6, which is very impressive. I think things grabbing me that hard is pretty rare, especially because like for me, I got most of the way through one playthrough. Starfield came out, and I played Starfield, went back to finish my first playthrough, and then went in and immediately in like 3 days did 2 more playthroughs to get the other endings. And part of that is that I got a lot better at the game, obviously, from doing it once, and then missions went faster and I had better parts. But a lot of that is just it's really good. It's worth playing that many times. And I'm disappointed to see that most like playthroughs on YouTube and whatnot, they haven't done the new game pluses. Because I was looking to see if there were like reactions to the final one, to see what other people's takes on it were, and it's just very few of them actually got that far. So yeah, I would love to see more of that. We'll do play through all 3 routes. All right. Well, we're at the end of the show, Brett. We did it. We're up there for contention for the longest Games Club we've had. I don't know if we'll beat Last of Us, but we'll see. We're going to be within a few minutes of it. It's shoutouts time.
Oh, boy.
Time to shout something out, Brett. What you got?
So I literally, I was rushing to finish it because I wanted to, because I was on the last episode, and I knew we had this happening, and I didn't want to be late for it. I just finished Victory Gundam, the whole ass 51 episode series, and it's one of the ones. It's yet another one of the ones where the reputation is, what does it have, like a, has like a 6.8 or something on my anime list, which is of course the end all be all truth when it comes to ranking anime. There's no other argument aside from my anime list. Um, I ended up giving it a 9 personally because it was really 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 freaking good. Uh, I don't even think it's one of those ones where you have to watch like the rest of the Universal Century stuff, even though it comes at the very end. It's just such a solid show, and it is very brutal. People die a lot because the creator was extremely depressed while he was
In
making
that
it,
mood,
but it's still,
as many mecha anime
of
creators
course,
get.
exactly. But I would highly recommend it. It's very good, and it's mecha tangential, so it's worth bringing up as a shout out here.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm gonna shout out Etrian Odyssey HD because
nice.
its excellent party creation tools allowed me to recreate many of my favorite cast members from AC6. So I've got Rusty, Carla, Chatty, good old Walter, and then Air is my final member. They've got a perfect portrait for an Iguazu at some point if I want to really just hate myself for a minute and put Iguazu in my party. It's a good time. Enjoying the party creation in that game.
Nice.
All right. That said, it's the end of the episode. As always, Tuesdays at 7 a.m. Pacific time on the podcast platform of your choice, YouTube and Twitch. See you next week for Starfield.
Oh boy.
Oh boy. Another great 8 out of 10. Maybe slightly less great.
Stop using Zimmermans in PvP or I'll come and kill you in real life.